Okay.
Oh, I need my computer.
That gives you
I'm gonna
all
pull it
that
up and
you
read
write
so you have your
down,
notes.
piece of paper, hands, and
Okay.
legibly read.
Okay, so further off to the right, but I just need to click.
Click it on there and.
So I.
Yeah, it goes to sleep. I can just.
Hang on, that's not. Which one do I need to use?
Doesn't, you're just looking off of it, that's projected from nowadays.
Very low print. It's recording already, I guess.
So we have everybody here. You got all that you're expecting, and you got all that you're expecting. Well, let me get us started. This is a fact finding, and my approach to a fact finding is that it's your hearing. And so I appreciate the work that you did to create this agenda. I honestly don't believe I've ever had one of these before, so I appreciate it, and I hope you can stick to it. I will find out. I don't want you to feel bound to the minute on this thing, but my approach to fact finding is really pretty simple. It's your hearing and your opportunity to provide me with enough information that I can hopefully make some sort of recommendation that might be helpful to you to resolve the issues that are an impasse. If you come here expecting me to decide something for you today or at some point in the future, that ain't going to happen. And so the more you can give me succinctly, please, the better. And I will honestly evaluate that evidence. What I will do is provide a fact-finding report. It will actually find facts and present them in a way that I think may be helpful to you. Obviously, I've not been involved in this process, so I don't know what I mean, I've looked at all the information provided. Thank you for doing that, because the last few of these I've done, the parties just wouldn't give me anything ahead of time, and I come in and I'm going through papers and trying to listen to you at the same time. That's not helpful. And so you've given me a context now that I can hear what you have to say, and you provided a format where I can go back and listen to what's said here. So I don't intend to do a lot of writing. I intend to do a lot of listening. And so in that regard, what I understand from what's been presented is that you're going to basically present information. So how many of you, would you raise your hand for me if you intend to actually present something, or if you will be a witness of some sort in this hearing today? So basically 3 of them. No witnesses that you anticipate or anything like that. Okay. Then what I would like to do before we get going is, I'm a notary public, so I can swear people in. So I would like for you to all raise your right hand and either swear or affirm that you will tell the truth in what you present today in this proceeding.
I
Say
affirm.
yes or no.
Yes.
Yes. That works for me. So the hearing really is yours. Present what you believe I need to understand about the process that you've gone through, where you are with your issues. There's still uncertainty in my mind as to exactly how many issues you would actually remain. And so I hope you'll address that as we move forward. And you don't have to agree on that, but I would like something in that regard. So I'm Dan Trent. I've been a fact finder for many years. I'm an attorney. So that's the background I bring to this, and not only an attorney, but a litigator for about 40 years. And so I would look at this hearing in a very different way than you will. And so present it to me in a way that makes sense to you, and hopefully will make sense to me. I'd say, go.
I wonder if it would be of any benefit for you to hear very, very short, like maybe 5-minute opening statements about what we intend to show you and why.
That's not on the
It
agenda,
is.
but if that would be fine with me, and so you hear another attorney talking because we're used to this kind of process.
Right.
And so if you all have an objection to a very short, just a summary basically of your positions? Or where
Of
you-
the outstanding items, or of sort of the outline of?
Just kind of the overall issues and what we intend to try to persuade the fact finder of. And you can go first if you like.
Sure, you want,
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, this is, off the cuff here, but,
Sure.
so I think what we'll cover today is a brief summary of the outstanding issues. Although I think we'll probably get this from both sides. There's not any one particular point in those issues that there's like a philosophical objection to. It's a matter of how you're packaging them together and the, total size of the compensation package. On our side, we'll walk through what the values of the district and community have and why there's an interest in having competitive teacher salary. We'll look at historical comparisons to what this district has done over the years, and also look at the market rate for teacher compensation. Because this, no district exists in isolation. You're hiring teachers, from the same pool of candidates as all the other districts in the area. So that's kind of the broad view. Lisa, did I miss anything major on that?
That's pretty good. And again, I mean, our handouts too that we
Sure.
showed in front should indicate what we're covering as
Sure.
well. And I'll probably have session by session recap of
For our part, by the way, the reason I'm here is because this board has not done a fact finding for a very, very long time.
Okay.
It just needed, frankly, a little hand holding about how to do that.
Okay.
And I did one for them years and years ago, and so they asked me to come back and do it. KNEA does these all the time.
Right.
The Eudora board does not. So in general, as you mentioned, your title is a fact finder. It's a little bit of a misnomer because what you're really doing is you're giving recommendations. I think the facts really are not going to be very much in dispute about what the issues are, what happened in the past. I think the ENEA will argue that Eudora's salaries are behind most of the surrounding districts. That's true, they are. I think they'll argue that the board has prioritized teacher salaries. That's also true. They will argue that the board's current offer uses a lower percentage of new money for teacher raises than last year. That's also true. But from the materials I've received, what I think the ENA will not address is the responsibility to live within the budget and the revenue that this district receives from Topeka. And the argument we'll make in the facts that we'll try to show you is that the budget and Eudora's cash position simply won't permit us to do what they're asking us to do. The board would love, love, love to give their teachers exactly what the ENEA is asking for. The comparisons that I think the ENEA will make are not strictly comparable for several reasons. Number one, Eudora has a declining enrollment, and unfortunately, the Kansas school finance formula is not kind to districts with declining enrollment. Also, Eudora's property tax assessment can't match the districts that they would like to compare us to, most notably DeSoto. Eudora's property tax base is about 100 million, and DeSoto's is at 700 million and climbing. In fact, frankly, exploding because of the new battery plant that is partially because of that new battery plant that's going on out there. So we'd love to give them what they're asking for. There's an argument to be made that the school funding formula is not fair to Eudora, but we can't affect that here today. All we can do is allocate the dollars that we have, and we must deal with what is, not what we wish were the case. The board will argue that they simply can't do what they're being asked to do for the benefit, as much as they would like to do it for the teachers, because they also have to look out for the interests of the patrons, the students, the parents, and the taxpayers in Eudora. And in fact, the last offer they made may have stretched matters too thin already. And so, well, without belaboring the point, that will be the point that we're trying to make. You won't hear anybody here saying that the teachers don't deserve what they're asking for. As much as we love to do it, we're just going to be based on a budget type of argument that it's not really feasible.
I probably also ought to add, since this is being recorded, that this case does have a case number. And that is 72I-1-2025. So with that, thank you for those summaries. And Brad, I should have asked you, are you an attorney?
I'm not.
I'm glad for
Thank you.
I am also not an attorney.
you. And I'm glad for you too. If you go ahead,
Yes.
jump right in.
Good morning and welcome, Mr. Trent, to your school district. Good morning and welcome visitors as well. Thank you for being here. And those colleagues who may be watching or following along later and community members, we appreciate your support. I'd like to introduce myself and my team members. My name is Lisa Moffett. This is Brett Parker, Mallory Rockowitz-Blick, Angie Brown, and Jack Lowe. This is our district promise, and it's aligned with our strategic plan. It reads, every student in Eudora schools is known by name, strength, and need, and graduates prepared for the future they choose. This promise is made by the school board, the superintendent, the entity that is Eudora schools, but it is kept every single day by the staff and the educators, the teachers of Eudora schools. The Board of Education's values make it clear that they recognize the role Eudora educators play in keeping this promise. Let me highlight, attract and retain high-quality staff through strong relationships and building trust. So, what are the outstanding issues in this negotiation process, and how did we get here? This negotiation cycle is really a result of a 2-year process. This is the second year in a row that negotiations has gone into the fold. Last year's delay was a result of not having the same revenue numbers to work from. This was resolved when the district's published budget confirmed Eudora NEA's LOB projection, which got us on the same page about money. This year, both teams agreed that it was vital to start out on the same page. We worked collaboratively, sharing our projection formula, and we were able to agree on how much money was coming from the state. Both sides can agree that any of these individual items, with the exception of base pay, are agreeable to both sides. So to go through these outstanding issues, step and column movement. This is moving down for years of experience and across formation. We did this was part of last year's package. It is also something that both sides wish to do this year. Addition of one step to each column. This is adding a column to the bottom so our veteran teachers can also benefit from that experience factor, because they're maxed out on our salary schedule. This was agreed upon by both parties as something that we would like to do as part of the compensation package. We did it last year, we would like to do it again this year. Supplemental pay. So last year we brought a new supplemental salary schedule, proposed schedule that we had worked on. The board liked the work that we had done and agreed to make a committee, appoint some members for a committee to work through that and kind of do a little bit more research and make a more robust plan for that, which we did, and we brought back this year, which the board was interested in adopting and liked what we had worked on with members appointed from the board's team as well. So that was a positive interaction on that step. Parental leave policy was new this year. It's something that we wanted to do to help make our workplace a better place to be. It involved adding 15 days of parental leave for families with an adoption or a child born. And the cost of this would be a one-time cost this year, but it would be refilled each year as used. We worked together on coming up with a financial cost on this, and the board's team was very agreeable of like, this is an attractive thing that we want to work on for our school district, and they were great to work with on that, and they want to make that part of our compensation package. Increase the accumulated leave cap. That was new this year. We just wanted to extend of leave days that you could accumulate from 60 to 90. We have some veteran teachers in our school district that can't keep that leave for, and that might also help in other things like taking vacation time during PD days and so forth, if they could hold on to those days. And then monthly defined health benefit. Unfortunately, insurance costs went up, and they went up big time this year for Eudora. 25 to 29% increase. It's really hurting our paychecks. The board graciously recognized this and wanted to put something in place to help and acknowledge that, yes, this is a burden to our educators. They proposed adding a $10 increase to the monthly defined benefit for health insurance. And that was an acknowledgement of, yes, that cost. And then they would like to do more, but that was something that they could do, put together with us. So it sounds like, yes, we've come together on these issues individually. We worked through the negotiations process on each of these items. When we get to base pay, we had a difference in what how we approach this. Now, the issue behind that is, as we negotiated about base pay, some of these other items dropped off. The last offer from the board left off the insurance, the monthly defined health benefit, and also left off the increased, the additional step for the veteran teachers. Those two items were not part of the last offer. So while individually each of these items were agreed upon with our two teams in negotiation as part of the entire compensation package, those things were sort of like a slider. They were added or removed depending on what the total package cost was. Okay, so this table here is a great illustration of all those compensation items and each of the negotiation sessions where those offers were presented. You'll see in our first offer, in the first column there, we have the board's first initial offer, which happened in our session 3, June 25th. And they came to us with a $500 to base increase, and they agreed to all of those items that we had worked through during the negotiation sessions. And their offer represented 29% of the new eligible funds to be spent on bargaining unit salaries. And the total cost of that package was $216,000. At this time in this session, we did not have our insurance numbers. We knew it was going up, but we didn't know how much. By session 4, we did have that insurance amount. We did know what we were looking at. And Eudora NEA made a proposal of $1,525 to base with all of those other items that we had talked about in negotiation. This represented 47% of the eligible new funds, the same percentage that was spent on the bargaining unit last year. I will talk later about revenue, but I'm going to move on to the next offer here, session 4. The board responded to our offer with 2 options. One, we could increase base salary to $1,000, but not have any of the other items discussed throughout negotiation. Second offer, $700 to base, would include all those negotiated. Make up 33% of the eligible new funds, 14% below last year's amount spent. So we moved on to mediation. We both agreed we were coming to impasse. We could not close the gap on how much money these packages would cost. We did agree on these items being important, but the price tag of the total package wasn't something that we could align on, and we went to mediation. During mediation, the board's team made an adjusted offer. They said that they could increase our base amount to $1,000, but they would then not be able to provide the additional step for our veteran teachers, and they would not be able to provide the help for our the increased monthly defined benefit for health insurance. Their offer increased their percentage by 1%. To spend $247,000 on the bargaining unit. Eudora NEA came back with an adjusted offer. We moved down 1% to $1,500 on base and that we had negotiated, including the additional step and the insurance. One thing I will mention before I move on, during negotiations, one of the things that we said quite often to the board was, we're not gonna tell you how to spend your piece of the pie. We're just asking that we maintain the piece of the pie that we've been working with. Don't shrink our piece of the pie. That's something that they have us say a lot. I know it's kind of cheesy. It's just a way for us to think about how we're approaching these negotiations. And that's something that we reiterated throughout the process.
And this piece of the pie, this is.
The percentage of money spent on the eligible funds spent on bargaining unit salaries. So whether you have $1 million to spend or $100,000 to spend, 47% of that's our piece of the pie, and we want to maintain that piece of the pie. It's clear that our community takes pride in our schools. We just passed a $39 million bond. Our community is invested. We have an amazing Eudora Schools Foundation that supports our school district. This does not happen without quality educators. Despite all the wonderful reasons to work at Eudora Schools, competitive salaries are essential to recruiting top talent. So compensation impacts that recruitment. Minimizing unfilled positions is important to our community. Parents would like to know who their teacher is in June, not the week before school starts. When we invest in our early learning center, we are preparing for tomorrow today. When we improve our schools in anticipation of growth and expansion, we are preparing for tomorrow today. When we expand post-secondary course options, we prepare for tomorrow today. And implement a long-term plan that addresses competitive compensation, we will prepare for tomorrow today. Long-term staffing plan is part of keeping our promise to our community. Our next part of the presentation concerns the market rate comparisons for our area. In this portion, we're going to look at our Frontier League comparisons. We're going to look at teacher residents. Where do our teachers live, and what are the comparisons for the districts where our teachers live and commute from to come to Eudora schools? And what is our closest neighbor doing? What is the comparison there? Our closest neighbor is 8 miles from Eudora High School, from Eudora Middle School, from Eudora Elementary School, from the Early Learning Center. When comparing the salary schedules for DeSoto and Eudora, with the boards, considering the board's last best offer, Eudora educator in the bachelor's column in their 9th year will make less money than a first-year teacher at DeSoto. We have 5% of the bargaining unit that live in the DeSoto School District. If you are a brand new teacher and you have a student, let's say you're a high school teacher, and you have a freshman student in your advisory and they tell you, I'm excited to become a teacher, and you say, great, let me help you. You advise them through their IPS process. You help them get connected with Ms. Kellerman in the teaching as a career pathway. You have them, you follow them through their teaching internship course where they work at EES. They graduate Eudora High School prepared for a future that they choose. They go to school and they get their bachelor's in education. And guess what? They get a job at DeSoto School District. It has been 8 years since they've been in my class or in this teacher's class, and they now make more money than their inspirational educator from Eudora. So how does DeSoto afford to pay their teachers more? How do they do it? Well, they dedicate 56% of eligible funds to their bargaining unit salaries. We talked earlier about 47% for Eudora. So DeSoto dedicates 56% of their eligible funds to bargaining unit salaries. Eudora is typically spent 47 to 48%. Let me be clear. We are not asking our board, we're not asking you to spend 56% like DeSoto. We are asking you to maintain the same 47 to 48% that Eudora has spent on the bargaining unit, the same piece of the pie. The board's last best offer means spending only 30% of eligible funds on bargaining unit salaries. We're not asking the district to do more, we're asking them not to do less. We want to work together on this. We came to this process in a collaborative manner. We wanted to start with the same numbers. We want to bring numbers to the table that are grounded in KSTE projections and formulas. We want to count both the added costs and the new funding for SPED. So see a projection at the first session for negotiations that lists the SPED expenses, but that's not helpful to resolving the bargaining, to doing the negotiations process. We want to count the added costs for new positions and the savings. So when we put the new early learning center salaries on the projection sheet, we need to put the attrition savings as well from the eliminated positions. We need to count the one-time savings from unfilled positions that you intend to fill later. That money can be helped to fund things like the parental leave policy or help teachers out in a year where insurance costs are soaring. And it's not just about filling those positions. It's also about retention. A recent report by Amy Shanks, our HR director, shows the number one factor for the staff leaving the district was compensation. We know that it has negative impacts when there's turnover. We know that it lowers employee morale, and we know that unfilled positions is a problem for the school district. Let's move on to some comparisons for our base salary for our Frontier League. Here you'll see the school districts in our league. I want to highlight Baldwin, which is just above us there. Last year, their increase to base was $2,000, so was ours. This year, their increase to base is $1,500, which is our last best offer for this school year. You can see across the board here too. Look at the increase to base, that last column. Spring Hill, 2,459 added to base. 1,820 added to base. Paola, 1,900 added to base. Bonner Springs, 2,000 added to base. Ottawa, 1,361. Tonganoxie, 1,750. Baldwin, 1,500. And obviously we're hopeful to be 1,500 as well. Next slide is our Eudora educator base salary comparison by residents. These are the school districts where our Eudora educators live. 58% of our bargaining unit lives outside of Eudora in these districts. You can see in the last column their increase to base this school year. You'll notice that some of, like Wellsville has $500 there. They were able to do $4,000 to base last year. We need to remain competitive. We're not asking to be the top. We're not asking to be the Blue Valley. We're not asking to be the DeSoto. We're really not. We're just asking to maintain that 47%. The money that you have spent on us in previous years, we're asking to maintain that same percentage on us this year. Our next slide here is a map of the surrounding school districts. You'll see Eudora there, 491. That's our current base salary under last year's salary negotiations or salary schedule. And those those labels are for those residents where our teachers live. We do want our educators to continue to choose Eudora schools. We do. So how does this affect your career? When you're that teacher that's just graduated and you're looking at where you're going to spend your time, let's look at the 10-year comps for Frontier League. If you choose to work in 10 years, you were making $34,000 more than what you would in Eudora. The next slide is 30 years. Maybe you're the Angie Brown of the of the teaching world, and you've dedicated your career. If you've dedicated your career in Basel Linwood, you would be making $126,000 more than you would if you dedicated your career to Eudora schools. Next slide. Let's look at the residence districts. What if I didn't commute to Eudora schools? What if I decided that I will just work for Olathe? In 10 years, I have $45,000 more going to the school district where I already live. 58% of our teachers live in other districts. They're represented here on this list. Let's look at the 30-year comps. If I choose to invest my career again at Olathe, would you like a free house with that? The next slide, that's all well and good. We're showing you some districts that have spent a lot more money on their bargaining unit salaries than in Eudora. We're not trying to be those districts. We believe in us being special and what we have to offer. Love things like our parenting plan. We acknowledge that we do some special things for our staff, that we have a great thing. So let's just compare ourselves to ourselves. Forget about all of that. Let's look at ourselves. Let's look at last year. The highlighted stars on this table here show the total revenue for last year for new revenue for eligible spending on bargaining unit salaries, and you'll see it's $724,000. If you look across to the right, you'll see that this year's revenue is $725,000. Very similar to last year, almost identical. You'll see the compensation items that we talked about in negotiations, some of which have been on the table, off the table, but depending on what our base amount has been. But you'll see that last year, the compensation package cost $345,000 for our staff, for our bargaining unit salaries. And that made up 47.6% of eligible fund spending. That's the piece of the pie. This year, Eudora NEA, our last best offer, asked the board to spend 46.5% on bargaining unit salaries. $7,000 less than we did last year. Slightly shrinking our piece of the pie. The board's last best offer, with the removal of the new step and the removal of the health insurance help, spends 34% on bargaining unit salaries at $247,000 there. So the rest unchanged, but the board offer is spending $97,000 less on us this year. We are not trying to be DeSoto. We are not trying to be Olathe. We're not trying to be Spring Hill. We're not trying to be Wellsville. We're just trying to be ourselves. And that is maintaining our piece of the pie and maintaining the same amount spent on our bargaining unit. We're asking for the same amount, not less. In conclusion, educators are usually the first ones in line to say, don't worry about us. We give up our time, talent, and resources because we love our students and we love what we do. It can be awkward to stand in front of our own employer and ask to be paid more. But it is not just my role as a certified staff member that brings me here today. I've been a Eudora resident for the past 20 years and have spent 13 of those years in Eudora schools. I've delivered classroom art lessons at EES through the Art Coalition of Eudora. I have been a substitute teacher at every level in Eudora schools. I've worked at EHS as a classified staff member in both an attendance role and a lead administrative assistant role. And now I'm a counselor at EHS. As a parent, I chose Eudora schools for my own 2 children. One who recently graduated and is working in the trades, and another in his junior year interested in engineering. I am the vice president and lead negotiator of our teachers union. I am a play director for soccer, a moderator for Scholars Bowl, a Rocks Girls Group leader, and a supporter of all students. I present to you today as an invested community member, proud of the work that we do at Eudora schools, and proud of our dedicated staff, many of whom have a longer resume than mine. Some of those folks sit here with me today at the negotiations table. We strive to be good stewards of the community's resources, while also recognizing that teachers are the most valuable resources that we have. Attracting and retaining top educators must be part of our strategic plan and is essential to delivering our promise to the community of Eudora.
Mr. Trent, I wonder if I might ask a few questions of this witness for clarification of that presentation, if there's no objection.
Yeah, so that is the extent of the presentation.
That's the extent of the presentation.
So we're not exactly following your agenda, and I don't have a problem. So my anticipation of questions, as you had them on here, would be both my questions and the other side's questions. And this will work both ways. So my suggestion would be that we start with the board's questions first, and you get in mind if you have a different.
I do. I would ask if we could take a short break. I just would like to have some water and a little snack and just take a break because I want to be present and you know, so we can do that. Obviously, we can move through this timeline speedier, the better is fine.
Yeah, so 12:16 now, so you want to go 10 minutes or you have 15 minutes on your agenda?
We're
12:30.
we're fine with it. Sure.
So let's try and get started at 12:30.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Mr. Trent,
Yeah, I stole one.
Everybody ready to get started? Okay, so based on what we ended with, I think the simplest thing would be for the board to go ahead and ask questions, and then I'll follow up with mine.
Okay. Ms. Moffett, would you prefer to sit there to respond to the questions? Is that, I was wondering if I should wait for you to get up there, or if that's where you want to sit?
I think I'm gonna go with the company.
Okay.
I have no book with podium.
And I want to start with this. The board has asked me, first of all, to express their gratitude to you, patient and hard work as a teacher, but the civil tone of these negotiations. So, having questions, and are you able to put up some of the slides that you talked about to ask about them, or is that, did you already put that all away?
Yes, but we actually just said that, and I said, oh, I do not need it. It's okay.
I have a copy of them, so we can refer to the paper copy if you would rather.
Yeah, that's fine. That works. We can do that.
We can do it. Okay.
Okay, so,
Somebody on that answer tech. Okay.
So I'm just gonna kind of follow along and ask a few questions about the things you said, sort of in the order that you brought them up,
Okay.
mostly. And so the first thing I want to talk about is that, table that had the offers, as they went through. And I just want to clarify for the fact finder that, each of these items, there was sort of an agreement on the structure of each of them. Isn't that true? For example, the supplemental pay issue, you actually talked about a schedule that you were all satisfied. It was only a question of how you were going to spend the available dollars and whether they would be on which of these items the money would be spent on, correct?
In each thing in the zone, we kind of arrived at how much it would cost and what it was about.
There's
Yes.
no confusion of how new supplemental pay would be implemented.
So there's an agreement on, if we want the supplemental pay, there's an agreement of what it's gonna look like. The
Yes.
question is that how we wanna spend our dollars?
Yes.
Okay. And that would be true of each of these.
Yes.
Okay. And so when I look at that, scale, or that, chart, I look at the percentages, and this is what you're referring to in your presentation as your piece of the pie. And so when you're referring to, quote, the pie, what exactly?
I can speak to that a little bit. So we look at all of those that are eligible to be spent on bargaining unit salaries that are consistent year over year. Obviously, that gets thrown for a little bit of a loop when you have some of that temporary ESSER funding. But primarily what we look at are the consistent title funds, but mostly then the general fund and the local option budget, which is why when we sit down and start the negotiations, those are the ones where we try and make sure, hey, we've got this figure, do you have this figure?
So here's what I'm really trying to ask. Are we talking about percentage of new money or overall money?
So it's both really. So what we track with KNEA is of the overall. So then when we go into the negotiation, we say, hey, this is what happened last year. Let's make sure that whatever we're doing for new money is not holding that back, right? So if you spent 47% of the overall last year, moving forward, if we spend about 47% of the new money, that should be consistent and we should maintain.
And so what the EMEA would like to see is this expenditure of 47% of the new money for salaries. Is that right?
For all the things that are included here, yes.
For this
Yes.
compensation package?
Yeah,
Package,
and to be fair, clarify on that, putting all of these things into that package is actually a little generous on our end, because just the easiest way to do the apples to apples comparison on that, what percent is spent on salary, is to do salary. There are some things in here that are not salary, but as an acknowledgement, those come with real cost. We understand that by counting the, maybe the supplementals or any of the health insurance, that might actually mean that next year when we do the full budget, maybe it falls to 46, but we want to be fair and say those things have cost even if they're not directly on the salary line item.
Okay. Now, to what extent, if any, do your numbers take into consideration compensation package increases for certified or administrative staff?
For classified or administrative staff?
Yes.
Again, that's where, back to Lisa's point, generally our approach is we understand the role the board has to do in managing the rest of the budget. Decisions on what you're going to do for the other staff members are part of that purview, which is why we try and say, hey, this is what has traditionally been the certified staff part of the budget. Let's try and maintain, or if we need to, grow that. So we're not setting aside specific numbers for that, but we're acknowledging is that in years past, spending 47% on the bargaining unit left enough money available to do what you needed to do for those other groups. And so we would see maintaining that be continuing to give you that ability.
So I think the board characterizes or believes they've offered roughly a 2.5% increase overall. Is that the way you understand it? Would you agree with that number or not particularly?
I'm not sure we've broken it down in that way. I know in the past, we've had a disagreement on what counts as doing an apples to apples comparison on what percent. Oftentimes, this board and others will look at things like all of the column movement and step movement and count that as part of the raise, and then apply that percentage to other staff, whereas folks on that, you say it averages out to a 5% raise. Some folks are getting that 5%, other folks are not doing column movement that year, they're not walking away with that.
Right, and I'm talking about 2.5% overall.
Sure.
There's 2.5% on a cost basis increase to the district.
Does
Does that sound about right to you?
I think that does sound about right, and I would say for comparison, what we've heard from KSDE is what's averaged around the state is about a 4.5% increase for bargaining units this year.
Okay.
So relative to that, yes, I think this offer falls in about that way.
So, in talking to my board members during the break, I think we agree with your chart for the most part, but on the first offer, and I'm not sure how much difference this makes on offer number one, their understanding, or they meant to make it clear that they were offering step and column movement at that time too. Do you disagree with that? Or is there a possible miscommunication there, or what?
I think it's possible miscommunication. We went back to, when building this and watched the video from that to see, hey, was there mention, I think, paraphrasing here, but it was, but not the rest.
It was $1,000 and nothing else.
I see.
700 and
Okay, so
So that may have been a miscommunication, but what we received and then went back and double checked seemed to bear out what's on the chart.
and it's a past offer, so it's not particularly relevant today anyway, but in session number 4, the board gave you essentially a choice of $700 plus all the additional items, or $1,000 on the base without all of those additional items, right?
Mhm.
Without all of them, at least.
Correct.
Okay.
Even if they meant to add the step and column movement, that's about 84,000. That would put the offer at 202,000, whereas their other offer was 241, so it doesn't. make
Again,
sense.
rather minor point at this point, but I just wanted to get a clarification on that. And then the last column there at mediation shows what they offered at mediation, which was they moved again. They went from $1,000 and they added all of the additional items except for the additional step and the $10 a month for health insurance defined benefit, right? And so that's the last offer, right? Okay. Okay. So talking about the comparisons now, one of the comparisons we looked at that you showed was the Frontier League, and you can put that up if it's easy to do. Okay, so, and the Frontier League is the athletic league that Eudora plays in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it shows Eudora at the bottom, right? Now, if you added $1,000 on the base, you'd actually be above it, right? If that offer had been accepted, you'd be ahead. So let me ask you about the reasons why you chose the Frontier League as comparators. Well, let me just ask it in a general way. First of all, why the athletic league? How's that relevant?
I think as an alternative, we have brought up the DeSoto comparison before and have been told we're not DeSoto, there are different circumstances. The athletic league represents districts that are less closer to, the center of the Kansas City metro area, that to the exurban, I guess, territory. So it's on relevant districts. We didn't lean just on that. Obviously, you've also seen the residence ones that there are other in the area that might not be captured by this.
Okay. So was any effort made to compare any of the Frontier League salary comparisons? Was there an effort to compare, for example, the cash balances of any of these districts?
No, that's up to those districts to determine their budget to put themselves in that position.
And did you do any comparison with respect to whether these other districts had declining or increasing enrollment?
No, I think what we're hoping to accomplish is by giving a wide array of comparisons. I don't know if it's the board's position that Eudora is in the absolute worst position of any of them on there, but we wanted to show districts in the area that are competitors for hiring the same pool of teachers. We're not, DeSoto is the closest one, so that can be on that, and understand that there are going to be a wide variety of circumstances on that. Spring Hill has growing enrollment, but they are on the extreme end of that. Others are throughout that spectrum, so.
But I think you would acknowledge, though, that enrollment trends are very important in determining what a district can or cannot afford.
And I think that comes, that factored into the negotiations here, where normally in a trying to get on the same page with finances, we would look at what are the attrition savings year over year. In acknowledgement of the slightly declined enrollment, we were willing to set that aside, even though in other districts we wouldn't, to say, hey, if that's what you need to do to sort of right-size the staff to the current number of students, we don't have to count the tens of thousands of dollars that were saved by eliminating positions.
And with respect to these comparisons, was any effort made to compare relative property valuations in those districts?
So I want to talk on that a little bit.
Did you make a comparison first of all, and then
Yes.
say whatever you want?
So
Okay,
we have looked at the property values.
Okay.
According to KSDE, Eudora is about the 18th highest residential property value in the state. That's in fact why you all qualify for raising additional funds for a cost of living adjustment locally.
I noticed you said residential. How about commercial?
I haven't looked at the commercial, but I know that KSDE uses the
Okay.
residential to
All right,
determine
go
who can raise extra funds locally. There are 29 districts that qualify. They're all 29 that are above the 15% beyond the state average. Eudora is 18th on that list.
And then finally, did you make any effort to compare other contract terms in these districts?
Financial
Contract terms?
No.
Okay. I mean, for example, like having negotiated in other districts, I know that sometimes plan time, the amount of plan time can be a big deal. You haven't compared the contracts on that.
There's not a comprehensive one. I can tell you that the districts that I work with that are included on the those lists have fairly comparable. I mean, it's not too wide of a range. Now, some of them that do differ are on the more land time, and those are also districts that manage higher base pay too.
And how about, I know, for example, one item that Eudora has that I've never seen in another district, which is the longevity stipend. There's not, for example, a longevity stipend in any of these other districts.
Many of those districts have longevity stipends.
Really? Okay. Anyway, this is not intended as a comparison of any other contract provisions, just simply base salary.
It's intended as a comparison of what what a teacher looking for their next position is going to put the most weight on.
And I heard Ms. Moffett say several times that we're not trying to compare to DeSoto, but just to be very clear on this point, DeSoto has skyrocketing enrollment, right?
Growing, yes.
And also property valuations, both residential and commercial, much, much higher than.
Can you speak to the impact of you've cited the property values? All the districts are funded through the same state formula.
Right.
The property values impact how difficult it is to raise those local funds. I appreciate that. But that's not an issue here. Eudora, to the credit of the board.
Yes, but that produces less in Eudora than it's going to produce in many.
But the amount that you are allowed to raise is determined by the state, not by, Blue Valley doesn't get to raise, as much as they want because they have the highest property value. They get to raise according to the same formula that everyone else is in. Now, they may not have to raise their mill rate as high, which is
right
an advantage.
Right.
But if we're in districts that are maxing that out, then it becomes a much more moot point.
Right. It's just a lot harder for Eudora to get to 33% than it is for another district.
Right. But since that is the cap, there's not a request to go beyond that, right? We understand that that's the cap, but that's the same cap for everyone.
Let me make sure. Come here. In terms of clarification. Okay, I think I have, thank you.
Okay, so my questions are at least somewhat similar. The first one, the salary and benefit numbers are an appropriate comparison. That's what I see when I do these things. So, but is there, you haven't really presented information to me about qualitative differences or similarities in your comparisons. So are there qualitative differences in comparing class sizes or any other qualities about the teaching environment between these various comparisons you made?
There's not a comprehensive look at that. Again, we tried to look across as many districts as possible because I'm sure of standards within that. I think what we see pretty consistently, though, is even amongst that mix, with that background, Eudora still shows up lower on the career earnings and on the base salary. So I can speak from my experience. I work across normally 6 different districts. I don't see a great difference, but and especially when it comes to those other contractual considerations as well. There are some things that Eudora has that others don't. There are some things that others have. That's not been a cry that we've heard from the bargaining unit of, these things are that there's an inequity there. What we look at is the pay. That's what's lacking.
Do you have evidence of inability to either attract or retain teachers? To me, that's the bottom.
Yeah, I think this year, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, there were 2 first grade positions that didn't get filled until a week or 2 before school. So, they were coming up against the deadline of parents wanting to know who the teacher is for their students. As far as I know, one of those last minute hires left 2 months later. So I think when you are, look, there's a certain pool right now. It is a tough time to be hiring teachers. That's ebbed and flowed over the years, but we're at a particularly tough time for that. When you're the last in line to make those hires.
And you have information from surrounding districts that tells us that they don't have openings or they don't have a problem with retention.
Yeah, I think we've seen it across a lot of districts are having that trouble. But that speaks to the point of how competitive are you in that market. Even those that are the most competitive are having the occasional position. So that is why you're seeing all these other districts race to raise their base.
And we also have some unique circumstances as far as, we have a wonderful CTE program in Eudora, Career Tech Ed, and so we have some unique positions, which are tough, pretty tough to fill, like an auto body shop and an ag teacher that we were hiring recently. We're kind of competing among some area districts for those particular skill sets. It's part of our CTE pathways that brings funding to our school. Like it's about our post-secondary options, and we have to compete with these other areas for that ag teacher, which I think is around.
Probably ago when we hired, it was one ag teacher for 3 plus Baldwin and Columbia at the same time. And it was a last minute in the July hire to get that filled, even though we posted earlier in the spring that position. It still took us till the last minute to get that hired.
And I think the corollary of all that too is I just point back to the district's own HR report, which cited that compensation is why they're losing staff.
And that was really where I'm headed with this. I did watch that, by the way. Where are you losing? This is about attracting. What about retention? Where are you losing teachers to? Do you know?
We lost one teacher to Wellsville, one certified staff member to Wellsville. I don't personally know the plans of the staff members that have left.
I do think it's relevant though, as we talked about, every district has their own unique budgets. Everyone's hiring from the same talent pool. DeSoto hired 70 plus new teachers last year. I work in Olathe and they hire nearly 200 each year. So there are jobs out there for folks who are leaving, and they are in high demand right now.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I'm not, but you can go ahead and ask a question if it's relevant to that.
Well, okay, I was going to ask, it's Mr. Parker, isn't it? And you're a UNICERV director?
Yes.
What districts do you serve?
So I work with Olathe, Spring Hill, Baldwin, DeSoto, Wellsville, and then the special ed co-op, the USB 614 that serves those last 3.
Okay,
And then for each other, I did bargaining this year in Turner as well. I've helped out in.
and with respect to the reasons that teachers are leaving, having to do with pay, I think you cited the number like 30% based on something that you got from the board, right? Okay. I assume there is a portion of those who are leaving the profession entirely to make more money. Is that true?
That would be up to the board's data. I'm sure that is a factor, but the gap, not just between pay between districts, but pay between industry also matters. And when you increase the base, you close that gap too.
Okay. Okay, that's that. I was just going to jump in on that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So on your slide about the Eudora educator base salary comparison by residents,
Other flags.
the 43.5 is your last year.
Yeah, which what they're working on now.
And do you know how these compare? Are all the others the current?
All
year?
the others are current. So if you look at the board's current offer, you take that to 44.5, and if you took the associations offer, you take it up to 45.
It's on the previous slide. This one.
Okay. What's causing, and this will be a question for you all too, but what's causing the decline in students from your perspective?
If I had to address why, we just don't have housing available. We don't have rental housing, we don't have apartments. We have some new construction happening, but there's, even right now, there wouldn't be a place for people to move, to live here.
Why is, other than proximity, why is DeSoto a good comparison for you to be looking at between Eudora and DeSoto? It seems to me like it's night and day different. So,
Sure, but they are the near, if a staff member looking to make more money wants to go somewhere without having to extend their commute, that's the closest place to go. The amount of new teachers they hired is more than 50% of the total staff size in Eudora. So if there are openings, that is going to be the most competitive place to go. That's not the only one we use.
I would also say that it's a school district that we share students with. We're in cooperation with our ed tech program. So we receive DeSoto students into our programs every morning and have for many years since I've been here. And so they are a part of our student population as well.
Yes, Eudora is a technical education center, and actually the Jack teachers, yeah.
I have just a couple more if I.
Go ahead, while I'm
Okay.
looking for my others, yes.
So when we look at this map here, DeSoto is to the east, that's 232, right?
Mhm.
And directly to the west is Lawrence, that's 497, right? And I noticed that you said 5% roughly of your bargaining unit is from DeSoto.
Mhm.
So we are roughly at 120 teachers, so we're talking about 6 teachers.
Yeah.
Okay. How about Lawrence?
Oh gosh, I think it's closer to 30 or so there. But
Yeah. And their pay, even after this year's raise, is still lower than Eudora, right?
yeah,
I'm sorry.
it depends.
Yeah, lower than what what's been
Yeah,
offered.
with the
If you just look at that number, it's
Yes.
like $483 higher. Okay.
Yeah, I do not think that you are at risk of losing educators to Lawrence on the basis of pay. I think the issue is that education between just about any of those districts right now.
Your slide about Eudora NEA's 24-25 offers 7,008 less than 23-24. It has in bold print, revenue unchanged. Is that accurate? And what unchanged from what revenue?
The combination of new general fund and LOB dollars add up to within $1,000, $2,000 of each. It's about $725,000 for last year, actually. I think it's important to note on there too, revenue last year, the board's opening offer was $1,500 on the base. So the offer, initial and updated offer from the association is really trying to get to, hey, this is where you started. We understand there's a few other things thrown in there, but this is less than what everyone at the end of the long negotiation agreed was an acceptable path forward last year.
Yeah, and comparing apples to apples here is going to be a tough one. So one of the statements was that 47 to 48% spending level is from the previous 47 to 48% of the spending level. Each of those two
Yeah, and that's in one of the artifacts, a 3-year budget analysis, but yeah, I believe 2 years ago it was 47%, last year it went up and ticked 48, 3 years ago, we do a 3-year look back, but if I look at the one from the year before, it was 47 when you go back an extra year.
Well, you're anticipating my question. So in previous years, was it?
Actually, Eudora has been pretty consistent about that. You see some that jump up and down a little bit. I have gone back, I think, 3 or 4 years. I think it's pretty consistently in that 46, 48 range. You do see others that jump around a bit more. One of the things that, like all things with school finance numbers, to get the actual number, you gotta wait until, like, a year later when all those things get published. So sometimes the budgeted number is different, but then when you wait a year and come back to the actual, it falls in line.
I don't think I have anything further. Any other questions? Okay. Well, then I assume that from the agenda, and I have no idea how close we are to the time limit, but the next thing would be for you folks to make a presentation.
All right. And the way I ask the superintendent, I'm going to sort of walk him through the paperwork we've submitted to you and have him explain it. And to the extent it also addresses things that have been raised by the DNEA, he will comment on those as well. Okay, so I believe you have our presentation papers, and the intent was just for us to walk through them piece by piece to give just a little context to what we've submitted to you.
And I didn't ask this before, but you have theirs
We do.
and they have yours.
Yes. There's going to be one exception, actually. Is it the same thing?
No, this is just, breakdown. This is just what it actually looks like.
Here, there's one, do they have this one?
No.
Okay, we should probably make a copy of this one before we,
Yeah, I got a make a copy of that. And then I included in his document, because we kept referring to the supplemental.
Yeah.
I included that in
That makes sense.
Mr. Trent's document, although, again, I don't think anyone's ever argued about any of the pieces of that.
I also noticed, I noticed that you had the planning document,
Yeah.
but not the first one that we had, so we can add that.
Sure.
should we do that now?
Do you want to take a break?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that so we can make sure that it's all here.
The question was, do we know what the flashing light is on the?
Mute,
is that good?
Is it solid now?
Oh, it's solid now.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
solid.
that's what.
Mine isn't, should I go closer?
Should be okay. We can double check.
Yeah.
Sure, that might be batteries. No, we should be good.
Test.
It's be ducking.
Are they? They're green now.
Oh, I'm solid now.
You're solid.
Perfect, yes. Oh, no, now it's,
It might be just batteries,
okay.
which should be, we'll find it.
Yes.
Oh, there we go. We're good.
Oh, it's
I'm
solid.
good now.
Okay, back on.
All right, let's get going.
All right, Dr. Michael, introduce yourself to the group, please.
Stu Meckel, Eudora School Superintendent. Again, thank you, Mr. Trent, for your time. Obviously, thank you, EMEA, for your presentation. It was outstanding. It was very heartwarming to see our promise up there. And again, I know the board and I agree throughout.
So Dr. Michael, you have prepared some materials for the fact finder to consider, right?
I have.
And I'm going to take you through those and give you an opportunity to explain them and put a little context on them. But let's go ahead, first of all, with what it is that we've got here. And it looks like the first 4 pages is just a narrative.
Just a report, correct. After that, you will have just Eudora's cash balances for the last 7 years. These are off KSDE's data warehouse hub. Again, those are things we report to the state, and so it's the easiest thing to just grab them off there. You will also have Kansas Department of Ed overall teacher pupil ratio. That is also off of KSD's hub, as well as the teacher salaries that is also off KSD's hub. So just 7 years worth of data there, because as Mr. Parker said, ESSER funds and some of those things kind of got a little wackadoodle with those pieces. You will also see something that was presented to the board and shared with EMEA throughout the course. I first started presenting this in the spring of 2024. And what it is essentially is a budgetary priority planning for the board. And you can see on page 2, it talks about the goals. Page 3 is a projected revenue assumption. Again, we just kind of project that because we haven't made our budget at that time. The other one is projected expenditure assumptions. And then the last is basically your revenue minus your expenditures equals the amount of new dollars you have left. And then last but not least, on the back of that as well, something we had to do for the state this year, but was very helpful for our district, is a projected enrollment for our new out-of-district piece. We have to publish that on our. This was something we talked to Mr. Tiedemann about after we had submitted ours both to the fact finder and to EMEA. This is all the same numbers you see in all kinds of different documents. This is just something I prepare for our board as we go into negotiations. You can tell that because at the bottom, it has board raised considerations and it's just a breakdown of total costs. And it gives them options so that they know, so we're not sitting back there in a negotiations meeting trying to run a tabulation. So these are not, any different number than what you've already seen today, but it's just a helpful document. And Mr. Tiedemann thought it would be helpful for the board. I did include, and it's on the back of those, on the back of your pupil teacher ratio, is I had our HR director run the percent increase. It looks like this, it's kind of multicolored. And it's on the back of this one. So, it's part of the education. Yeah. So, and on that one, you'll see our internal documents about percent increase to the base salary. And then what we try to attempt to do, because this is always hard after the fact, is what was the new general fund dollars at that time. And so you can see it goes all the way back there.
All right, so let me sort of walk you through this, and let's start at the beginning of that
Sure.
packet.
Sure.
And, yeah, and this is a packet that you prepared, I guess, with probably some help from your staff.
Well, I didn't want to bother them with trying to pull off the KSD website, but our HR director always does a great job of trying to figure out where we're at, and what we think total costs are. It's become a little bit easier now that we've moved to the Skyward system, that she's able to run those reports.
Okay, so let's go through and hit the caps, north of $10 million, and that is the first exhibit that's attached, right?
Yes, sir.
If the fact finder wants the detail. But I guess what I would like you to address with the fact finder is what relationship, if any, those cash balances have to do with money available for raises.
Sure, just in general point of fact, again, going back 7 years, our cash balances are thinking of it like our bank, and each one of those banks has different accounts. And so if you look at our cash balances over the year, they have stayed either steadily at zero or decreased over the course of those 7 years for the most part. The one I would point you to that's probably the most concerning when you think of schools, you're good. When you think of schools, is both are able to fund one-time purchase processes, projects. Another one that is tough for us is special education funding as a bank. And think of it, again, just as a bank for those funds. What's so concerning about both of those for our district is that Ms. Moffett was right. We did pass a $39 million bond, which was outstanding. It obviously happens through the support of our community and our teachers, and will be amazing for our students for years to come. We had to do some things on that because of deferred maintenance, meaning roofs, infrastructure, those pieces, because for the last years prior to me getting here and even before the passage of the bond, we didn't have enough capital outlay funds to do any of those pieces. Period whatsoever. When you talk about $1 million roof, or you talk about $1 million worth of aid, now you go back to leasing those things, and you're draining that account. So that's concerning, and it's brought us to the discussion we had with the board this year of how do we make sure, while we have bond funds that can go to fund some of these pieces, how do we make sure we're able to save some in our capital outlay for rainy day? What's really decreased our capital outlay over the course of these years is we have had to take what we would just call custodial or maintenance salaries out of capital outlay. Again, if you remember, I said capital outlay is a one-time purchase, meaning we bought a bus, we bought jerseys, we bought this. It's never been meant to be a continuous stream of funds.
And just to be clear, capital outlay, and many of these funds are not funds that are available to pay teacher salaries at
Correct.
all, correct? Okay, so it would be, just to get to the bottom line, the $10 million should not be taken as money available for raises, right?
And that's where it's so deceptive, and I think I mentioned it here in the second part. Our funds look like we have $10 million of carryover every year, but in reality, we've got about 9.46 in bond funds that can only be spent on bond purchases, infrastructure purchases, buildings that are very, very tightly watched to those pieces. None of that can go to salaries.
Okay, so speak briefly then to the available cash balances, Dr. Meckel, and where does Eudora stand, for example, in relation to KSDE's recommendations with respect to cash balances?
So if you were to talk to KSD's financial staff, they would recommend 10% at the lowest. 10% of 10% of all funds. So if our operating budget is 15 million, you would want to have 10% of those in contingencies. But bad things happen or the need arise. And so the example I'll use in this case is the interlocal is having financial problems, and they supply a mid-year, something that hasn't been budgeted, ask of dollars from our district. If we were setting right, we would have money in our special ed reserve fund. We do not, so that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And that's why you want to have reserves, so that if those things happen, you're able to then pull from those and be able to generate that fund. Where Eudora has been, and it's not obviously happened overnight, but where they've been is we have very little to zero cash reserves. And so each year that we're not able to build those up, we just keep kicking that can down the road.
What's the danger when you operate at that level of cash reserves?
So our license it's under contract for an entire year. There's a couple things that have to happen. It would first start with your classified staff because they are at-will employees. If you can't make your end of the year financing, you would have to release them. You're also talking about the audit or the no more purchases starting in June. If you don't have the funds cash-wise, you're not able to spend those funds legally.
So, and I've talked about it a little bit, but I think you should speak about it. What is the effect of declining enrollment on your finances in the Eudora School District?
Yeah. So again, I think one of the misnomers in Eudora is that we're a growing district. And I know I really appreciate Angie talking about our housing situation. I think that's probably what's led to where we're at. If you look at your document here, again, I think Mr. Tiedemann referred to that. It is going to be under the teacher-pupil ratio. What I liked about this document is not teacher-pupil ratio, but I do like the FTE enrollment, because you can see over the last 7 years, not only a decline in enrollment, but a very large drop in enrollment over the course of that 7 years. And again, our funding is based on students. So each student we have less is less state aid we're going to receive, both as a base state aid and then the weightings that are associated with that.
And so what that means is if you don't have significant or sufficient funds in reserve,
Right.
that you are relying on the legislature every year to increase the base aid per pupil
So yeah,
in order that you can make the same budget you made the year before.
right. If you look at our documents here that we presented as far as all those new dollars for us are truly based on essentially the addition to the base state aid per pupil. It is not based on a growth of enrollment for us.
Yeah, just kind of a little bit on a tangent you just mentioned a minute ago. How far are we from Lawrence?
Well, 6 miles or so.
Okay.
6
When
to
you
8
talk
miles.
about lack of housing, that's probably why you have so many teachers that live in Lawrence.
Yeah,
It's because there's housing there.
there is not a lot of more housing. Again, I think that's a thing across our whole area.
Yeah.
But we have been able to hire in the last couple of years several teachers from Lawrence, both at the interlocal level and the district level, to Eudora. So.
All right. And your salaries even today are competitive with Lawrence.
They would be, but I would absolutely acknowledge, and I know the boards acknowledge how low our salaries are in Eudora. That is, you can see that. We're not here to argue that. I would point to what we have found is always going to be a game of catch up in the fact that there are at least 2,000 on the base, and so you're never going to catch those pieces. While our board wants to make sure that our teachers are able to get as much as they possibly can by being fiscally responsible, the comparison to the odds that Eudora is ever going to catch Olathe is not going to ever happen. Or probably any of the other districts, if they were to deal with what we're dealing with declining enrollment.
Continuing to go through your narrative here on the second key data point,
Sure.
salary and compensation history. How does your history lead you to where you are and the constraints you have today?
Yeah, and I think the easiest way to look at that is probably a difference in how ENEA looks at negotiations and how the board looks at their negotiations. If you look at the reimbursements that the board has been able to give as far as the salary additions, the board has always started with, here's our new dollars, and then they've started ticking off what are the costs of those new dollars. Those would be a raise in property casualty insurance. Those would be a higher payment for what we need to have for our interlocal sped payment, their request. It might be new additional staff that then would decrease that. And instead of saying, well, we're going to get 47, 36, 29%, whatever that may be to teachers, this is what we have left as that pool. then that pool needs to go to how do we benefit all of our employees, both classified, certified, and administrative.
And how do you respond to the notion that because you have, over the past few years, given raises that are approximately 47-48% of money, that you ought to do it this year?
So, and that's a great number to point out, to say, hey, we want to always give 47. I wish that was the goal. But if you look at where we're at cash balance wise, how can we afford to do that and start building back some of those cash balances? The other piece of that as well is last year, the board again started, I think it was mentioned, started with, hey, we really want to give teachers as big a raise as we possibly can. Let's give them $1,500, I think was the initial raise last year, to what, I can't even remember what the ENEA offered. But again, that is a good faith of, this is what we feel like we can offer and still remain fiscally solvent, but making sure that we want to put all or as much as we can towards our people, while also making sure we're covering our bases. If you look at the dollars, that 47% last year, now you have to add paid classified at that percentage rate and certified. The district had very little working money from new funds last year. And if we don't make any changes this year, we'll have very little working funds. Just the napkin math wise, the 47%, in addition to what we would need to pay our classified and certified, that raise of $1,500 would leave the district with approximately $168,000 of the new money we've all agreed on here. The problem with that $168,000 is we've already said that $100,000 of that is going to go to our early childhood director and those for those new positions. So the district's operating cash for this year is $68,000 of new dollars that is supposed to try and help supplant $12 million worth of a budget and all the things that go with the rising of inflation or things that happen throughout the year. It's hard to set back and bank any of that if all the dollars are going to salaries. And so the board's planning was, how can we make sure we're giving teachers the most we can while also remaining fiscally solvent and being able to set some of those monies aside.
Moving on to the third key data point having to do with student-teacher ratio and staffing. Of course, lower pupil-teacher ratios are beneficial for children's education. What's the effect of that on your operating budget?
Well, and I think I included this piece in here. So the idea that if you think of that trying to point to our FTE and the decrease of students, again, as Mr. Tiedemann said, we haven't lost in the last several years a great number of teachers, yet we know that our class sizes are getting smaller. And you can see that. Time's up. That's perfect. You can see that. I think it's present if you look at both the FTE, and then if you look at this document, it's very scary in the fact that you can see the students that we have coming into Eudora schools at the kindergarten level are a lot less numbered than the ones we're graduating. The example, last year we graduated a class of 168 to the 93, 94 kindergartners we brought in this year. There's a large gap of students there.
And so what that means is when you have declining enrollment, although pupil-teacher ratio goes down, what that means is you have fewer students to multiply towards base aid per pupil.
Correct.
For the overall reimbursement from the state, right?
Correct.
And has the administration or the board sought any reduction?
Started to figure out what can we do through attrition if someone's left or not backfilling that. And that's critical because the board does not want to see any positions cut, anything like that cut. So the idea is, what can we do through attrition? And if you look at the numbers here, it doesn't make a lot of sense as our numbers that are still high at the high school to have attrition there. So what it means is probably through attrition, less sections at the elementary school than what was needed when we had classes of 20 there. or the 120 compared to 93.
I think this is probably, and you mentioned it already, but let's walk through the budget priority planning document.
Sure.
That starts with that heading, and it's got the big red cardinal on the front
Right.
page.
Right. Again, this is something, as we're always reflecting and trying to do better, this is something I really try to do for the board, so that we can have the discussion and the board can set their priorities in the spring. Because when you go to setting priorities when it comes time to negotiations, it feels like a negotiation tactic. If we're doing this in June and saying, well, oh, by the way, we wanted to save that money, then it seems deceptive. And so this was presented, I believe, in March or April about what the goals were on this. And so that those dollars were what the board wanted to earmark initially before we even knew kind of what our finalized funding would be. And so again, it just goes back to their goals. And one of their main goals, again, is attract and retain high quality staff through relationships, one of our board goals. Improve student success through expanding opportunities. Starting our early childhood program this year is huge. But again, the idea that the support they're going to need will need to come through Eudora, early childhood director, as well as an administrative assistant. And then finally, on an incredible amount across the state. We were very fortunate ours did not go up this year, but last year, not setting aside, well, we need to have blank amount for materials. We know that those costs are going to go up, as well as, again, the biggest prerogative of how do we utilize capital outlay funds for their intended purpose instead of taking salary out of there. Because again, that's not a one-time purchase. The $500,000 we're taking in salaries out of there is due every year. So no matter what we get capital outlay funding, the number continues to grow unless we're able to move those salaries back into the general fund.
Okay, so when we look at the projected expenditure assumptions, it looks like at the time you did this budget, you were assuming there would be approximately $1 million in new money for this year.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
And how close to being right was that?
Well, if you subtract the 275 in sped funding, it's probably fairly accurate.
Okay.
What we ran into, again, not new to any district in the state, is, hey, the districts are going to get more special ed funding from the legislature. The idea being that should go to the school districts, perfectly fine. Our sped interlocal said we need all of those funding. And I remember as we talked through that, we purposely left it off of some of those documents because we didn't know where it was going to land until we all agreed that, hey, this is where it's going, and that's where you can see the subtraction from this overall document for, I think, the second to last page here under expenditures.
And that's how I was going to take you to the next page there, where it shows you go through property and casualty insurance, sped assessment, materials and supplies. That shows an expenditure already of about $675 million
Correct.
of new money. Is that right?
Correct.
And is that, and are you still satisfied with those assumptions that you made at that time?
Yes and no, because the board's offer is actually eating into both of those assumptions, setting that aside.
Yeah, I understand that, but this is $675,000. You're not projecting that those expenses are going to be less than they are.
No.
You think those are pretty close?
Well, I think we'll probably need more out of supplies and materials. But I do know that we need to at least set aside more money for that than we have in the past, which was never identified.
And so the last slide on there, well, second last slide, which shows the $1 million minus the 675, shows what possible new money after projected expenditures.
Correct.
For what, salaries?
That's what I typically do with our board, is say these are the new dollars.
Right.
And this is what we can do to fund our staff. So that would be certified and classified and administrators. So all employees, and so they have kind of a number to work from. And that's where you come to the green number, where they can see the green page. They can see, okay, this is approximately what we think it costs.
Let's go ahead and jump to that green page. Sure. Again, it uses the approximately $1 million of new money, and the top figures there under revenue shows where that money comes from. One is the general fund, right? And it's about 3/4 of that money, and that's based primarily on base aid. Yeah,
that's working an estimate that we get from KSD at the beginning of January. And again, these numbers were all agreed upon at the time, which I thought was very helpful this year. I thought that made everything go a lot smoother as we know exactly what dollars were.
The next number is the 33% LOB, and LOB is local option budget, right?
Correct.
That's based on local taxation.
It is, and the board reserves the right to not max that out every year. It has, because to try and shift away from a large loss of funds.
All right, so then when we look at the next heading, it's expenditures, and that essentially goes through the same expenditures that we just looked at in the board planning document, right?
Correct.
And comes to the same number of 675, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then I think these are the important numbers here. It says under NEA.
So, yeah, against those were all the things that the ENEA had come to the table and asked for, which we then tried to assign a dollar value to, and worked together to kind of assign those pieces and agreed upon those numbers. What this does is show that this is what NEA was able to bring to us. The board's one ask this year was some work not agreed upon. So these are all things that NEA asked in their bargaining piece. The board's piece of that was the one thing the board asked for was not agreed upon. So
There was a language issue.
yes, it was.
And we've abandoned that at
Yeah.
this point, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's take these I'm the fact finder to be able to compare these costs to the various items that were shown on the table that the ENEA came up with. So the first one is the updated supplemental schedule, and we talked about that a little bit. Those are for all of these supplemental schedules like coaches,
Right.
And the various sponsors, et cetera, of different activities, and those are stipends, right?
Those would be, considered a supplemental contract, so not part of our agreed upon negotiated agreement. They're part in there, but it's not like a teacher's salary. And that represents the hard work of both ENEA and our administrators to really come into something I think everybody agrees to.
But if the fact finder, that would be $33,318, right?
Correct.
Next item, parental leave pool. It shows $10,000. First of all, what's 5 average mean? I'm not sure if I know what that means.
Yes, that was for our board. So again, when you're budgeting things, it's hard to say how many people are going to use this every year. So I had our HR department go back and say it's about an average of 5. And that number was agreed to by both parties as a good round number to say, in the future, before any new dollars are spent, that is backfilled up to 10,000.
So
We don't want to sit on that as a bank, but we do know that we need to be financially responsible to fill that every year.
So in other words, if the fact finder thought that this should be implemented, what this is a leave pool. If you were to give those $15 to every teacher who had a child, and if we assume that the number is 5 every year,
Yeah, give or take. Correct.
give or take, the cost of a substitute teacher to replace that person during that leave period would be approximately $10,000 a year.
If we had the 5 use that, it probably.
If it's
be that.
5.
So yeah, if it's 8 like we had last year, it's going to be a little different than that. But that's where the board's taking that risk to say we'll backfill that regardless. If it's 2, then we won't have to fill it as much.
So that's the cost of that item.
Yes, sir.
The next item is the $10 per month on health insurance. And I assume the 185 is how many people are taking it?
It is total employees.
Okay.
So that, again, that's not just our bargaining unit.
I see.
Total employees. That's why that number may look different if you factor just the bargaining unit. But if we're going to offer something to just our teachers, we would also offer it to our classified.
Okay, so that, and the way it works in Eudora is a certain amount will apply towards the cost of their health insurance.
That time settled on a dollar amount. It is very beneficial as far as budgeting because when insurance goes up or down, the district's tied to something that can really fluctuate new dollars or worse may lead to cuts. So it's a steady amount and that's just adding $10 to that per month.
Which leads me to another issue here. I represented that I thought that the amount, the $1,000, the last $1,000 offer was approximately 2.5% increase. Is that about right?
That's what we factored internally, but that is, as Mr. Parker also said does include the step dollars plus step movement because it is all a raise.
And that would total would be an increased cost of about 2.5% to the district.
With a 2.5 raise, the cost is going to be a little different than that.
Okay.
And I would just say we have settled, so that money is already taken from these totals because of settling with our classified and administrative.
And that's what I was going to say, because this contract has not been completed.
Right.
Teachers haven't gotten their raise yet.
Right.
But you didn't want to hold up the raises for your classified staff.
Correct.
Custodians, et cetera, all the people who are not teachers or the administrators. So you went ahead with that approximately 2.5% raise for those people.
Correct.
Okay. Row addition. Just to be clear, that's the additional cell at the bottom of each row, which is something that the association wanted, correct?
Yes, this will be the second year in a row for that, and it's fairly easy to calculate because our HR department can go look at who stopped. As we want to make sure that everybody's able to get a raise, that's why they agreed again to this initially this time as well.
Okay, so those are the various costs of the bells and whistles we saw on the previous schedule, right?
Correct.
And then if you go down to the bottom, it gives the mediator, I'm sorry, not the mediator, the fact finder, an estimate of the cost of base raises at various different levels. Isn't that true?
Correct.
So explain what those mean and what the cost of a base raise at each of those levels would be in the event the fact finder were to find that a raise at that level would be appropriate.
Yes, so what I did is I took the expenditures minus all the requests from EDA to come up with that dollar figure. And then what I always like to do for the board is give them opportunities and options to see what a raise would cost. And so again, we have Amy run basically a simulation of what each one of these looks like. And so you can see that a 1.15% raise on, which is 500 on the base, $259,000, 750, which is 317, 870, which is a 2% at 348, and then $1,000 at 2.5, which is about 387 and change.
Okay. And I think the important part then is if you take each of those numbers, even the lowest one is higher than the amount that you calculate you had available after these increased costs. Isn't that right?
Right. It eats into what the board has said is a priority to set aside for both funding district supplies, materials, as well as moving positions out of capital outlay.
And we didn't quite finish that, but let's make sure we do it for the fact finders. Where we see the revenue, we covered that, but there's the $1 million of new money, right?
Yeah.
Minus the 675,000, which is increased costs elsewhere. And that would have left 325,000 available.
Correct.
However, if you do the NEA request, what I called bells and whistles a minute ago, that's another 80,000. That brings you down to 245, right?
Right.
And so that brings you down below even the $500 offer, which was the board's opening offer.
Correct. And I think when we work together through our negotiations, the board tried to always associate a dollar figure to each one of these asks, knowing that, hey, that's fine, the board agrees to this, but it has to come from that pool of dollars. It can't just happen outside of that pool. And so basically created a menu, hopefully to be able to show. And that's why everything and the $500 was the initial offer, because that even exceeds what it would probably be considered fiscally responsible for the board to offer. But because the board does appreciate our teachers, and they want to make sure that our teachers and staff are able to get a good raise, well, it went all the way up to $1,000 on the base, which just that alone exceeds what they even set aside beginning to offer.
Okay, moving back to the narrative again, we got off it a little bit, but let's go back to that. I want to finish the last key data points. There's a couple more. One is constraints on cash balance. The key data point there is that your contingency reserve stands at $110,000, right?
Correct.
And what's your comment about the, if any, about the adequacy of that number?
Well, that's incredibly low to the fact that That wouldn't even touch a month of payroll, should something happen. That wouldn't cover maybe 2 vans. I mean, thinking $110,000 isn't going to cover much in the scheme of things. And if it's given towards salary, then it's gone.
Legislature did not finish their bill and get additional money, distributed on time for you to make payroll, hasn't it?
There has been times where both that happened, or worse, in the 08-09, before I was in a superintendent position, they actually had cuts to what would have been the final payments of the year.
Right. So the next key data point is financial health and future outlook. Address that data point, please. It's just the next one. The heading says financial health and future outlook.
Page 3. Okay. Yeah, I'm again thinking of the board's role as duly elected officials. You can have increase reflecting careful financial management on several of those things. However, these funds are primarily allocated to specific purposes. And the teacher salaries, although not even touching our neighbors, still have steadily risen at an average of 2.8% over the time of 22 to 23. Again, each year, teachers in Eudora have received a raise plus their step in movement. It could be argued whether that be adequate or not, but I know the board has always tried to make a habit and make a priority to pay our teachers whatever they can.
So then the last one is the district salary offer, and I understand you offered as much as $1,000 on the base plus several of the add-ons. I guess what I would ask you to do now is tell the fact finder what you think is the outcome you'd like to see for a recommendation.
I think the board continues to stand by their offer made last time. The work that we spent the salary matrix for the supplemental salary matrix is important because both of our people have worked on that. That's why it was in that offer, as well as the idea of putting together the leave pool for maternity leave, which means maternity paternity leave. So,
okay. Let me give you this time to tell the fact finder anything I may have failed to ask you about but should have. If there's anything. I feel like we've gone through it. I can't think of anything.
I can't think of anything. As well.
Okay, very good.
I'll let you all have that for a while, but let me ask a couple of questions so I can get some things in perspective. What is supply?
So that could be anything from the increase in paper. That could be anything from the increase in fuel costs. Because the general fund can be spent on any of those pieces, those things happen. It can be, take your pick on any sort of supplies the district would have throughout the year. The exception to that would be obviously food costs. We're able to take that out of our food service budget.
So has your 2024-25 property and casualty insurance expense actually increased from last year?
It actually, I think I marked on here, it actually stayed the same. There was no raise to that cost for us.
Okay, so when you, 23-4 was 369,688.
Right.
24-5 is projected 361 change.
Yeah.
0, that's just kind of rounded.
Yeah, it's just a rounded number for that. Again, that's something that we would see typically might be $10,000, $20,000. So seeing a 0 there needs more money for the other purposes.
And then additional staff, I think you touched on, or somebody.
Learning director and a early learning assistant. We, not to go down too far of a path, we recognize the need for early childhood in our community. And so the board's vision and the community support spend $2 million of bond funds to update that space and get that for what would be 104 students now.
Okay. Why don't you all ask your questions and then I've got some others that I'll follow.
But to take the scheduled conference break before we do it, that's all right.
We can. I'll tell you what. Yeah, let's do that because my questions will fall into that. So How much time do you need?
Just 15 minutes is what we have.
All right, so 1:52, so we'll be back at, try and come back.
Why don't we go back to
2:07?
After the 10 after.
We did 10 hours.
10 after 6.
I'm sure.
It's going to expand potential costs.
Good for me. Yeah. Sounds great.
Mr. Trent, do you want me Yeah.
And that's one with each column on it.
No, I don't.
Yeah. There's two different ones, right? Yeah, that board, this stuff.
Is that right?
Yeah. I still have more reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, again.
You're kind of a paperwork, but
Reasonable.
Yeah.
Reasonable.
we just printed them off. I got copies for these kids too. And we just write the same label on the top. We said did you print?
Okay, right there, okay.
Yeah.
I think their battery's dead. It's running through the computer now.
Can it still pick us up from over there?
I hope so.
Do you all want him over here or sit?
Oh, wait, I
down?
think you're probably more comfortable. up there.
Perfect. So, we're all here, so I say, assuming the technology. is
Lisa.
working.
Passing a couple things out, but if you don't mind that happening at the same time here.
This is just the, salary schedule percent increase per hour for your offering. We have a calculation document.
So I want to start just make sure we're clarifying a couple of things here. On this page with the green bar, at the bottom, it talks about the BOE raise consideration estimates. How do we get nearly $260,000 cost per $500 base? I mean, there's about 121 employees, $500 is $61,000. How do we end up at 260 on that?
Because that includes our classified and our administrative.
If you pass it on, have you already granted those raises to those folks?
The 2.5%, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is it your intention to update that depending on the outcome of this negotiation?
With the amount of dollars.
I guess if that's already passed, right, if we're looking at how much do each of these things cost, if it's, comes in less or more, I don't know how you factored in which number did you use for the admin and classified raise, I guess, was that the 2.5%?
Yeah, so what I have is our
Based
HR
on what?
department say, run these, whatever this would look like,
Right.
put this on the base. Okay, what is that, this estimated percentage, and then for each one of those, and that's what we also use, then pass that on cost-wise to our employees.
Okay. I know this is always a point of difficulty in these negotiations because you have a responsibility to the other employees, but this group is only bargaining for the association. I guess the only clarification we'd offer is it's at your discretion what you do with everyone else. We're not trying to dictate what you have to hand out to anyone else. We are responsible for bargaining for the bargaining unit. So when we do our numbers, right, obviously we are looking at cost to pay for what we're asking for, and the rest of the budget is at your discretion. I did want to look a little bit at the documents Lisa handed out, though. Just, there's a lot of different ways to throw around the percent of raise when we're talking about salary schedules and we're talking about all the different elements. But if you look at these two spreadsheets, these just show the percentage raise to any given cell that one might be in. So the board's offer of 1,000, on the handout it says it's 2.5%, but I believe it's actually 2.3, especially since the 500 is 1.15. But it is a 2.3 if you are in the top left cell. If you are a more experienced teacher, it is down closer to 2, and then if you're on, that longevity factor, whether or not there's that additional step, that might only be a 1.4% raise. And I know there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. We just want to offer some clarification that it's only that top line number if you are a brand new educator. It's a smaller percent raise if you're further down. And then,
Can I speak to that a little bit?
Sure.
So I know it has always been, or at least in the last several years, EDAs and the board's priorities to put those new dollars into base. And so that's how that's factored.
yeah, and I guess I'm not disputing that, but when we say, hey, we're giving a 2.3% raise here, so that's what we're going to pass on to everyone else, it's not a 2.3 raise for every member of the bargaining unit. It is a 2.3% raise for every administrator, if you use that number. So when we do the calculation that way, it always ends up shorting any teacher who's not on that first cell. A small percent, right? We're not talking the difference between $10,000 raise and, but there is a difference between getting a 2.3% raise and a 1.4% raise.
And that's not uncommon that districts would refer to it like that. The one weird one you share as an example, Ottawa does a percentage raise. That's why they always end up with some really weird
Sure.
numbers of like
Again,
0.5.
I think we're all on the same page of adding a solid dollar amount per cell, but I guess the issue is if we're citing that, well, that means that we have to turn around and give a 2.3%. You're giving a real 2.3% in raise in the numbers that you're citing to the classified and to the administrators, where, again, looking at this, it's only a 2.3% raise in that one cell. Everyone else is a smaller portion of that. So, again, the rest of the budget is yours to manage how you want, but I think sometimes that does throw off how we're looking at those calculations, and it leaves the members of the bargaining unit feeling like they're getting the short end of that year over year when we use them.
Let me follow up on this. I'm willing to listen to how you make apples to apples of this. I'm not sure it's possible. So the janitor also gets a 2.3% increase in whatever. And you all bargained for this kind of increase on the base, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to be clear that there's nothing new here.
There's nothing new in how it is handled for the bargaining unit. What we're being shown are numbers that say if we give a 2.3% raise to this single cell, we now have to calculate that we're giving that level of raise to everyone else, and therefore that's why the district doesn't have those dollars to spend. I guess what I would say is it's up to them how they give a raise to those other groups. If they would do it more in line with the average teacher raise, then that would actually save them some dollars on that rather than choosing the cell that gets the highest. I don't mean to belabor that point.
Yeah.
I also wanted to chat about the enrollment and get some clarification on there. So I think Lisa handed out, this is the enrollment numbers that were presented to the board, and sorry, I have to find the one that we were looking at before here. But we end up getting some different numbers there, so I just wanted to talk through that.
Sure.
In the one in the cost projection, are we counting the 40 ed tech students, or is there a reason they don't count towards that?
Which one is that?
Sorry, so,
Yeah, this one here.
yeah, I'm hearing that, sorry.
Yeah.
Looking back and
Yeah,
forth,
this
just
one.
trying to.
So when we pull the data from Power School,
Mhm.
it pulls students that are enrolled even for a class. And so that's why those are there. This is not meant to be a budgetary document. And I presented to the board, this is a is who we have as bodies.
Okay,
It doesn't mean we receive an FTE fund.
so head counts rather than
This is
FTE.
a truly a head count of enrollment.
Okay.
It's by no means reflective in
That's
where our
helpful.
budgetary dollar is.
On your, back to our expenses here, one of the expenses, is the additional staff.
Mhm.
I think is there a reason we're spending $100,000 on new staff while citing declining enrollment as a reason that we can't keep pace with surrounding district teacher pay? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So what we heard from our community partners and bond stakeholders is the real need for early childhood here in Eudora. We also recognized that we had a waiting list of students who couldn't get in there. So the idea being that we needed to start that center, we put bond dollars towards that. We knew what happened years ago when we expected an elementary principal to bounce back and forth here and survey and supervise that. Just lost the support that it would from a actual director there. This doesn't even encompass what all that costs, because you've got a $400,000, but yes. But the idea that if we're going to start early childhood center, we needed to do it right. It was a discussion in spring, so the board knew this is what we need to do. Those were the only two positions added to this year, but again, it felt like if we're going to make this investment in our early childhood center, we need to make sure it's staffed right and appropriate.
Is there a reason we count the cost of those additional staff, but not the savings of reduced staff elsewhere then?
Sure. Where would the reduced staff have been?
With the MTSS position was a $70,000 position that is, the bargaining unit got smaller by that position.
Sure. And again, I think I spoke to it, but I'll speak to it again. If we continue to see declining enrollment, and we're still paying the same amount of teachers, not the amount of dollars, the same amount of teachers, we will be broke. Even this year, if we then turn around and put that into salaries, we don't save those dollars as we continue to either decrease enrollment or decrease the funding. So that money is then turned around and given away, whatever that position was, we're right back to where we're at now. And so if we can do it through attrition instead of a mid-year cut, that's critical, or at least having to risk someone who doesn't see that coming.
I understand. I think it feels like we're counting it twice if we say we need to not count attrition savings because enrollment is on a mild trend downward. But then we also double down and say, even with that attrition savings, we can't pay anything, even taking that off the table, we can't give the same raise others are. It would be a little bit fair to include the $70,000 savings if we're gonna count the cost of new staff. And we can look at the enrollment numbers as well on that.
The only thing I would state is if we continue to pay the same amount of people we have with decreased funding from our enrollment,
Sure.
again, we've talked should drop off from last year, what will we do next year?
Disputing that the size of the staff should match the size of the enrollment. But there are savings and we're not counting those even while we are counting additional staff. Again, don't mean to belabor that point. On the capital outlay, the intent was to move $200,000 of maintenance and custodial salaries.
Correct.
It looks like, and I apologize, we've got a copy, but we can pull it if we need to. In the budget for this year, I can see about $70,000 of salaries that were moved. The general fund goes from about $1,200 to $72,000. Are we missing the other 130 that is coming out of the general fund for capital dollars?
I guess I'm lost on what document. is that?
So I'm pull up in
And
this, just the district budget for this year.
Yeah.
Under the general fund, I think that's line 2,600. And
Can we see that going into capital outlay?
basically, and here, I'm happy to share this around, but the salaries last year actual were about 1,200. The budget for this year is 72,000. So
In our
my
capital-
assumption
in our
is if
capital
you're
outlay
moving the
budget-
capital outlays from capital outlay
Sure.
to the general fund, that would be, a $200,000-ish
Yeah, so
salary line.
the one I would look at is the top where it says salaries certified, and it takes $647,000. That is the number that we are currently taking out of capital outlay.
Certified positions?
Well, it's salary certified, but I mean, it's probably coded wrong, but $600,000 is what we're paying out of capital outlay every year. So the $200,000 that we want to shift out of there is a third of what we need to be operationally set to make shifts, and that's when that happens.
I apologize for the problem with having one document here.
Okay.
Are we, yeah. Is there a line in there where that other, because I see where 70,000 of it is moved, is there a line in there that shows where the other $130,000 of salaries that once were in capital outlay, right, traditionally have been, that have now show up in the budget for general fund salaries?
Not that I can think of, unless looking at both of those, then I'd have to look at that.
Sure. Yeah, I can have that.
Mr. Trent?
Oh, for this, okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Yes, but I guess how to build that balance in capital outlay is you're gonna take about $200,000 of expenses that in previous years have come out of capital outlay. You're not paying those folks, right? They're still employed, they still need maintenance and custodian, but rather than them coming out of capital outlay, they're now gonna show up on the general fund, which is what
Yeah.
produces an expense that reduces the amount that can be spent on the bargaining unit.
Right.
But I guess my point of clarification is I only see 70,000 moving, not 200,000 moving when I look at the general fund.
Well, and again, that's set aside of new dollars. That won't happen this year unless we have new general fund dollars. So again, that's a transfer at the end of the year.
Okay.
If you can look at those pieces, we have to use new dollars to buy that out of capital outlay. In the past, we have exceeded our general fund, and that's had to be taken from other things. If we don't build that up, again, budgetarily, it won't be 200,000, I can guarantee, because we've already, the board with their offers already given away 1,000 or 100,000 called.
Too many documents floating around now.
I understand.
Is this one been shared with others as well? The original?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Trent?
So at the beginning of this process, and I don't think I was there on the original, the original version of the planning tried to demonstrate that there was only $52,000 available. I think one of the challenges through this negotiation has been, it's been the process of this team bringing forward the actual LOB formula to drill down that we spent expenses, but not spent revenue. It is, that practice, I think, makes it difficult to have a lot of trust in the figures that are presented.
Sure.
When they only change in a positive direction when called out and work is shown from, hey, here's the KSDE document that shows that this is how much LOB money we would project with this. Here's here's what we have heard from 614 on how, funding to expect and what they're going to be taken. So I just want to point out that has evolved quite a bit over the sessions.
It absolutely has, and if I can talk on that, because I think you're painting a picture of us being disingenuous. They were with us each time we talked about that, and I remember at one point, we almost quit the meeting, and we might have even stopped the meeting because we didn't know what the interlocal was going to request. So yeah, you would see that shift as that picture becomes more clear.
Explain what the interlocal is.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, the interlocals are sped. And again, they have the less cost they think we'll need. Again, when I go back to that money that we had, that we had all hoped we had a percentage of it, 2 working documents and/or I think was even shared at that time with everybody at the table. The idea being, we really do hope that we would have had that $275,000 because this discussion would look a lot different.
And the only point I make on that is I think we understand when, hey, there's an update to the number, but when a cost is shared and no revenue whatsoever, when we know there will be revenue, is not shared, it paints a picture of we can't even afford to that and column. But we do know there is more sped revenue coming, and we may have to update that number as we get it more accurately. But if you only count one and not the other,
What's better?
well, the general fund money that comes from the sped. So that $275,000.
That's calculated into $1 million originally that is then subtracted, so.
But on the original documents, there was no demonstration of that revenue.
Because we had no idea what that would look like.
We made that pretty clear.
Yeah. And we all agreed that we didn't know what that.
But while presenting there's only $50,000 to spend. Again, but not to belabor that. I guess one follow-up question then too, because we talked about money available. Has the board looked at taking advantage of the cost of living adjustment funding that's available to Eudora and 28 other districts?
The board does discuss that every year. Obviously, this year it's gonna be too late because we've already ratified our budget and submitted it. The problem being is that adds a mill to our taxpayers, which is great for that year and those raises, but it only ever equals those raises. So then in years to come, if the board wants to decrease the mill, now they have to buy that mill back from somewhere else. Either new general fund dollars to decrease that mill, or that mill stays in the books. So it's truly a one-time great deal. It lasts for the year.
You might want to just give
Sure,
kind of a
sure,
little bit more
sure,
background
sure.
on what the COLA adjustment is and how it works.
Tell me more about it.
Yeah, so it is a right given to, as Mr. Parker said, several districts throughout the state.
28 or 29
Yeah.
qualify.
And with that, the board is eligible to raise an extra mill for what we consider a cost of living expense. What that mill generates is offer evaluation, which would create a pool of dollars. That would be, what we would do is put that back into salaries. Problem is, once that mill is in the book of our 58, 59 mills now, how do we get rid of that mill? Because we're never gonna not get that money less.
And how do you authorize that? Is it just a vote of the board or is it,
It would show up in our budget, when we create that in August and when the board adopts a budget in late September, so.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess all that to offer, you all are the experts on your own budget. You are the ones who make the decisions on how to spend those things. But if you are citing this is our financial situation, this side of the table is not in control of that. What we have tried to show is that other districts are managing a lot of these same pressures and coming up with a way to give out $2,000 on the base, $2,500 on the base. There's some acknowledgement on this side that, hey, that may not be the situation that we're in, but can we not at least create the gaps lower? So I guess all that to say, we tried to throw out some comparisons, and there are various reasons you can say not this one, not that one. Is there a correct comparison for this team, this negotiation, and future negotiations to look at that is, again, there's no such thing as an apples to apples comparison. That's why we tried to pick a lot to, but if we're going to say, right, that one's not right, is there an appropriate one? Is fair for, this team to look at and examine similar pressures?
So I would say each district in the state is unique, both by their own local control of the board, and what the board's decided over the course of that district. So to compare them gets really tough, especially because, again, you could say, well, we're close to Baldwin and Wellsville, but I can tell you about cash reserves percentage-wise, we are incredibly lower than all of them. So while they may have almost similar idea of what they look like as far as pay, why can't you just reach them? Well, they don't have the same budgetary burdens we have as far as cash reserves. And so again, unless you're setting back money, so I guess I would say it's pretty hard to compare every district to the state.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Do that.
So it was interesting, we had a bond proposal, and so did Baldwin School District, and Alpha bond passed, but theirs did not.
Mhm.
So we have, that is, you're right, we can't use that on salary, but that's able to be spent on our, like, we talk about cash reserves and so forth, and we spoke to,
Well, wouldn't be spent on cash reserves, so
right,
yeah, so they, again, I think our first bond initially failed because it was actually adding mills to their taxpayers. So taxpayers are typically not in favor of adding more mills. Ours was mill neutral, or what we would consider, we can't call it tax neutral, but mill neutral. So again, that's like comparing apples to oranges just because of our financial situation with the rise of our valuation.
I was going to speak to, like, it improves our position that we have a $39 million bond.
Can use that to pay for deferred projects that would have come out of capital
Yeah.
outlay
Yes,
before, and now there is.
Well, and that's absolutely, again, I probably didn't delve into that as much as I should. That's absolutely correct. We're able to take care of some of our infrastructure needs that we couldn't afford to with capital outlay. But unless we can get those salaries out of capital outlay in the next 3 years, 5 years, we're right back to where we're at, if not worse. Because again, we're living on a salary point of capital outlay. So those dollars never go away. We need to get back to one-time purchases out of capital outlay. So if you do batting cages at the high school, well, you're not gonna have to buy batting cages next year. But with salaries, that continues to take money from that every year unless we don't pay those people.
Is it fair to say then that the intent of moving that is not to address like a specific, this is the capital outlay plan over the next 3 years we need to fund? It is to cushion.
It's to make
Whatever.
sure we're not in the same fiscal position. Well, I mean, again, as KSD would say, we would like to have 10% of dollars in reserve. And for us, we're not even anywhere close to that on any fund. That being the case is, say the bond is gone in 5 years and all that money is spent, and all of a sudden we have an HVAC system go down. Well, HVAC systems are in the millions of dollars. If we don't have any funds for that, we're either doing that HVAC or getting back to a payment cycle. So again, the idea is why we have the opportunity with these bond funds to fix some of our deferred maintenance, we're able to start building that up.
Understood. I think that's probably it from us.
So,
You hadn't worried.
it's not like I'm gonna come up with any new ideas for you, but let's go down this line so I can understand it. You have a plan of sorts, at least, using the bonds to help you start this process of increasing those fund balances.
We're not dipping into them.
Okay,
Right.
what's your plan to get to the point where it's not always hand to mouth here?
Right. So our plan would be over the next several years to move salaries out of there, thus building that up, because again, you wouldn't, say it's $200,000. We're not going to spend $200,000 in capital outlay this year. So you're starting to build that back up in one-time costs, so that when we can get those salaries out there, you could actually start banking that in capital outlay.
And so from their perspective, how well has this plan been communicated?
We started this in the spring, at the board level, we needed to make sure that we were able to move those salaries out of there. Knowing that we have $500,000, we would set a priority to that. As far as it's communicated to them, I guess it would just be in this document, and the idea, I don't know that I ever said, hey, this is the exact reason why, but the idea that we need to start building up our reserves is critical. And that was mentioned, that we have to build our reserves.
Sure. So what I'm hearing in this process is you guys have control over what money becomes available. And so you have the ability to manipulate, if you will, that amount so that we can never get what we deserve compared to this. I don't know if it's fair to either side, quite frankly, but if there is a plan and they could know it, and they could know that in these years it will be lean, but in these years maybe it won't. Is there something of that nature that can be created?
Absolutely, a multi-year board plan could be created. For here's what we plan to do with capital outlay. When we talk around the board table, so as the board talks, is what are our priorities? Number one to do would be to build up every reserve. Again, you can think of the special ed reserve, you can think of those pieces. Most critical at this time would be our capital outlay, because you either use capital outlay to purchase those things, or it comes straight out of the LOB general fund. They can be spent on anything.
And you're maxed out on the LOB.
Yes, we are.
So many moving pieces to this, and I don't envy any of you in your positions here. have you actually experienced cash flow issues towards the end of the fiscal year?
Absolutely.
And how did you meet those cash flows other than just managing them carefully, stopping them?
So a lot of the time when we run out of money in the general fund that can be legally spent, those items then have to be moved over to capital outlay. That's why you see that continued dip, as well as the salaries we're taking out. And so that's why all of our balances are at zero, because we're not stockpiling cash. In a perfect world, we would end with money both in the general fund and the LB that we could then transfer to our reserves. That's not happening now. We're spending that plus more, just trying to make payroll and all the things we do.
I heard mention of the schools foundation. Are they able to help in this situation?
They're incredibly helpful, but not as a funding arm of our district. They'll give away $31,000 to teacher grants, but they're certainly not ever a fundraising mechanism.
So this really is a question for you all in this process. Do you have any questions based on what I asked?
Off of yours a little bit, and I understand this is not one that there probably is an immediate answer, but I think it's worth asking, hopefully helpful for future years. Mr. Trent asked about the multi-year plan on, hey, this is lean right now because here's where we're at with our capital outlay, here's the plan to get to the other side. I think one of the things that has been experienced on our side of the table for really last year and this year is there a multi-year plan, or can there be a multi-year plan for being more competitive on the salary schedule? Because there are negotiations where there is conversation around this year is going to be lean for these number of reasons, but bear with us, here's the 5-year plan. We, shared buy-in towards, we all want to end up at that point. So again, I know there's not asking you to invent that on the spot, but that did spark, that is some conversation that has happened here. I think that's just helpful long-term for everyone.
And I can't necessarily speak for the board, but again, I think that would show the shared grouping. The board is responsible for setting the budget and the budgetary priorities, but in understanding and communication, sure, I don't know. Had we come in and said, well, this is going to be a lean year, and we hope that by savings through attrition and that said that we're okay with what the board offered, that's not 47%.
I think that's where the long-term perspective is, right? If it's, hey, the long-term plan isn't that the closest neighbor is going to give $1,500 more than us raised every year, right? We're not going to, that gap may grow for this year, but we're going to find a way to hold pace or, maintain position at least. And again, I'm not asking you to do that on the spot, but I think just clarifying, I think the frustration sometimes is the plan that it's going to be lean always, and it's always going to be, the solution is going to be to reduce the bargaining units slice of the pie to continue the same method.
And again, I think you can see, if you look at the documents that over the 7 years, it's been lean for a long time. And so the board's tried to put every dollar they can into that while also being fiscally solvent.
This is really a question. You have a sheet with the green column. This is very helpful, assuming that you agree with the numbers. And so this column about NEA, these various costs, do you agree with those costs?
So I think one of the artifacts, I couldn't find the right page, but I think, where did we go? That has the comparisons of costs from last year to this year.
While you're finding that, let me ask this question. Of those numbers under the NEA,
Yeah, thank you.
all of these are teacher, I should say educators, I'm sorry. Educators only, except for the health insurance.
Correct. And some of them only work with our teachers, others we do, the board always extends that to the others.
Supplementals would be, and also, because you don't have to be a teacher to be on the supplemental contract.
That's true.
I will tell people we have Those
It's also important to note that this 33 under supplemental is based on the current base. So
that would,
whatever raise happens, that number will increase.
that would increase, it won't increase astronomical, but it will increase.
Mr. Trent, to answer your question, just kind of going line by line, we have the same number on the supplemental, same on the parental leave. We have a different on the health, but that depends on who you're counting in that, right? Again, we try and do all ours on who is in the bargaining unit, what is the cost of what the bargaining unit is asking for, so we use that for, Right. right, which would, again, it's not astronomical. I think you're talking the difference between 14,600 versus 22,200, right? And then lastly, I think then the number of the law, what is a raise the base, same consideration. We look at this, how many members of the bargaining unit are there? What's that dollar amount? Multiply that out. Obviously, the board has their own consideration of, does that have a, multiplier when they, or whatever they should choose to do for administration and classified staff.
So let me clarify something. The 33,318 for updated supplemental, the term updated made me think that maybe this was based on your initial offer or something. It's not. This is based on 23, 24.
No, it would be based on, since we haven't settled,
Right.
it's based on whatever the working salary is if we adopted this. Now, if we adopt this and then add whatever that is, they don't factor what we might add.
What is
Let me
this?
help you with that. Here's what's going on. The supplemental schedule is based, each of the stipends is based on a percentage of base pay. So if the base pay goes up 2%, that 33,000 is 2%.
I comprehend multiplication. Whether we're talking about 23, 24 numbers or 24, 25 anticipated numbers based on your offer.
So this, right now, is $33,000 to adopt this supplemental contract. If you look at this, there are several that are in red that were additions to what we estimate the cost will be. So positions that were added to it, and then there was a couple that went off or changed a percentage. So if you look at the 23-24 working contract, and you take this updated supplemental, that's what we anticipated costing, is $33,000 in addition to.
Just doing the math on
Doing the
what
math on the
base
additions.
change, we're probably talking about, the board's offer would be about $750, $800 more with the last
Right.
DNA offer. You're probably, I don't know, pushing close in terms of the rest of what we're looking at.
It doesn't blow up anybody's numbers on here.
I'm with everybody else. I've got things. I don't know where my questions are anymore. I guess I'd like to hear more from you all as to, I've heard housing, I constantly hear about the tremendous demographic cliff we're facing someday. I've worked with higher education too, and so that's a serious issue for us. What are you anticipating for reduced enrollment?
So again, it's a common misconception that Eudora schools are growing. I think Angie hit to the point of the housing costs are a lot here. The other thing that happens is Eudora is a great place to go to school and raise your family. So people will buy a house here, raise their family, and then where are they gonna go? They like this place, so there's not a lot of homes for sale. Added to that is, even before Panasonic, if we could build houses, we would attract families here. But your average young family is not spending $400,000 on a 1,500 square foot slab. And so there's not necessarily a market for homes. We have not seen an increase in enrollment. We have some things that are gonna come online that we hope will continue to grow our enrollment. But what we're experiencing is the boom from whatever that was ago, with our largest class sizes being the 5 last classes. And what we're seeing now is an enrollment of, 93 to 100 students. The other thing that contributes to that, I think, statewide is the lower birth rate. That goes a long way down the line, obviously, but families aren't having 3 or 4 kids, they're having 1 or 2. So those are things that we think are contributing to that.
And can I assume that all students are not created equal in terms of funding? And
No,
so-
that is correct.
And so do you anticipate any categories of students that can change these numbers?
So we have seen an increase in our at-risk students, which we did a larger weighting on. Our sped weightings that would go up with those increase, that money goes to the interlocal anyways, as we don't employ any special ed staff. So yes, as we've seen the increase in our numbers of 3 and 4, at-risk go up, we have captured more dollars that goes to at-risk program. Not necessarily a blanket dollars available to all teachers, but certainly can help offset some of the costs of the children.
Do you have a question?
On that thing, I mean, is part of the intent of the early childhood program that you all are standing up an attempt to bring more folks to the district and maybe, I don't know if reverse is the right word, but affect that trend?
Again, we have great programming throughout in every one of our buildings. I think we talked about the ed tech, we talked about our middle school, we talked about the elementary, and great things that has throughout. One of the things is if families don't have a place for their early childhood, and all of a sudden they go to a business in Lawrence, or they go to a base, or they go wherever, they may then continue to send their kid to that school. And our goal is that we are drivable, I think, as you guys showed on that map. If we can get a family to drive their kid here, odds are they're going to start a Cardinal, they'll finish a Cardinal. So that would be a ancillary, but still a good benefit of that.
And then I guess jumping off that, now that there's the open enrollment law on campus, right, where they can transfer in if there is capacity, it looks like, looking at the class trends, if you pick the right grade level, there could be capacity. Are there?
So yeah, our capacities this year were wide open.
Yeah.
We wanted to take all that and I think just because we've seen a declining enrollment, what we experienced this year was not a larger amount than normal transfer in. Typically, again, the numbers we see at the high school and middle school. Again, that's all based on transportation. So the families have to get them here. We do go, I'm sure there'll be Lawrence families that want to come here if we drove a bus over there, but we don't transport past our own district boundaries.
I guess last on that would be, given that the reality is now that families can choose to look for those spaces, have you given any thought to sort of the long-term implication of if you have unfilled positions or you're not hiring the top teachers available and a district 8 miles down the road, it is not that it, there's only so many folks to move, but that could exacerbate trends.
It is, and we are discussing internally even how do we market our schools. Not that we want to put up billboards in Baldwin or DeSoto or Lawrence, but we already have a great thing here because of our teachers and staff. How do we make sure people know that to grow those people here? So we are working on some marketing strategies that will bring families here and showcase what DOL does.
How do you market the concept that you've got some pretty incredible class sizes here, pupil and teacher ratios?
Yes, and again, I think that's what they like about Eudora schools. I think they also like, I think it was mentioned in comparison, so you go to Eudora High School because DeSoto High School is much larger. You go to Eudora High School because Lawrence High School is much larger. So the idea of it's that quality of life that our students have here. Obviously, that comes from what our community and our staff create. And it's just about telling that story farther out there and getting past that, at least the boundaries of the district.
We're still limited by no housing.
Right.
Oh, well, that's all that was counted.
Yeah.
So that's a huge issue.
So let me press you a little bit on that ratio. You acknowledge that to a certain extent at least, that ratio is maintained or maybe improved by reducing population. And yet you're saying that it's a plan, it's something that you intentionally do. So that's simply a function of attrition of the teachers then?
We plan to start making sure we're able to have more money in the future. Yeah, the goal is to be able to do that through attrition. The example I would give is, let's say we had a class that had 7 sections in it at the elementary, that had 12 kids in it. That's not sustainable. So what do we have to do to make that they have 18 kids in it? Again, one of those things is going to have to change. Either you have less staff or you get less funds. Because we're very much set up as if we have 1,700 students and we have 1,600 students.
Questions about any of that? I saw that there is a hard stop at 3:30. Heaven forbid I would challenge that. 2:56. So, do you have any more information that you'd like to present?
No information in the way of evidence or anything like that. I envisioned it very short. I noticed they said 15 minutes. I think I can close in less than 15
I
minutes.
think probably the same.
In fact, I'd be happy to close right now, summarize and be done.
Yeah, and,
Let me ask this though, do you have any additional information? I have a bunch, I'm gonna give you this piece of your budget back, because I don't have the rest and it wouldn't help. And I don't need it. I do have your 2023-4 agreement. Correct? And
Yeah,
did you
negotiation
share
agreement.
that with, you know what it is, obviously.
We should have access to it, yeah.
Okay.
And I just included it so that we would all formalize with it over here.
I think it was helpful. So, thank you. So I have all of the documentary information that's going to be presented. The one additional thing though, I do have the video, the very, very well presented video of the HR director.
Our IT department will be very excited about that.
I was impressed. It was well done. Nice production value. So, let's do that. Go ahead and give your closing statements. Do we need to have a coin flip or anything, or is it on the agenda?
Oh, it's on the agenda.
It's very thorough.
They want me to go first, I'm happy to go first. I don't think there's, as I said at the beginning, I don't really think there are any surprises. The facts are pretty much agreeable. It's just the way you look at the problem is a little bit different. The way the board looks at the problem is that they have limitations, fiscal limitations, which need to be addressed regardless of their desire to give the EMEA what they are asking for today. We took you through the numbers. The only thing I heard that addressed that a little bit today that I hadn't given too much consideration to was this issue of, taking money from capital outlay for things that could be paid for with operational budget. However, when you do that, you're really robbing Peter to pay Paul. And at some point, you can't do it anymore, and you have to pay Peter back. And that's where we are, and that's what we're arguing to you today, is that we cannot push our balances lower. That's the board's determination. I personally think they're right. Doesn't matter what I think, it matters what you think, I suppose. But they have pushed everything to the limit to give past raises at 48% of quote pie, and they can't do anything. In fact, they maybe shouldn't have done it last year. You could argue they shouldn't have done it last year. They want the teachers to feel valued. They want the teachers to be happy. But at a certain point, the board, they're somewhat political creatures, I imagine. They want people to be happy. They want their members to be happy. They want their patrons to be happy. They want their teachers to be happy. But at a certain point, you have to say, this is as far as we can go.
I always hate when the judge interrupts my closing.
That's fine.
I'm gonna do it because I'm in a position I can't.
Yeah.
47% never again, or
Oh, no.
47% this year?
Okay, so this issue of a long-term plan, I think it's fine. I think that's something they could work on. It will always, however, and I don't want to throw cold water on this, but it will always be subject to what happens in Topeka every year. And so whatever you plan, you'll have to make some assumption for what they're going to do in Topeka, and they will almost never do it. But at least that will be a starting point from where you can have the next discussion. I don't think anybody in this room is saying, you know, we don't ever want to do 47 or 48% again. I'm sure if they were able to do it, they'd like to come back and do 54% next year, if they could. I don't want to suggest that's possible, but if they could do it, I'm sure they would, to make up for what they have not been able to do this year. It's just that, my only point is this: when you're trying to decide what is an appropriate raise for this year, you can't just use that 48% because that's what they got last year. It doesn't compute. Likewise, the comparisons with the surrounding districts don't work, because as it was admitted, and I'm sure everybody probably knew it anyway, those comparisons aren't real comparisons in terms of financial circumstances. They're not real comparisons in terms of declining enrollment. They're not real comparisons in terms of cash balances. They're just not comparable. The only thing, I think the relevant information is the financial information which you have received today. And that's, unfortunately for everybody in this room, I think that's what you're gonna have to make your recommendations based on. That's my closing.
Yes.
I'm not gonna say anything new here, but budget priorities are a choice. It's this side of the table does not get to set those, but the board does. The not adopting the cost of living adjustment, which could have raised more than $200,000, is a choice. Our offers right now are $90,000 apart. Last year, we were probably at a similar amount apart before we met in the middle. But it is a choice to do that. So when you're citing the funds aren't there, in part the funds aren't there because you're choosing a small part of it not to have. That's a political choice that the board is making. But 47% isn't a magical number. What we're saying is the same priority that you put on the paying the bargaining unit in the previous year, we would like you to maintain that. We would like the teachers of Eudora to not be a smaller priority next year than they are this year, and the year after that, and the year after that. Understand there are other realities, and the financials are real. Different districts have different pressures, they have different needs, but the job market is the same. One district 8 miles away from another is hiring the same teachers. And when teachers are looking for a place to go, that's what they're paying attention to. And not everyone will be able to adapt to that the same, but it's imperative that every district that wants to compete in that job market does what they can to be as competitive as possible in there. And at the very least, to prevent falling further and further behind. I know we've talked about the reasons that this district is different, and this district is different, and this district is different. But what we're seeing on the comparisons is it doesn't matter which set of them you look at, Eudora right now is towards the bottom of that market. I also want to speak to something just from my experience, and I worked across multiple districts and multiple bargains, and this year, when filling in other places, got to add a few others. I can only offer my perspective that it's different sitting at this bargaining table. Part of that is something that I think we had good conversation about today, is that collaborative discussion of what does the long term look like. That's more present in other bargaining settings that I sit at. I finished up the Wellsville discussion this year, and they only did $500 on the base, but they did that because last year was a really tough bargain. And they did $4,000 on the base, and both sides agreed, hey, this is the priority right now. We know that's going to make next year a little bit more lean. This second year was an easy year where it was 500 and everyone agreed on the numbers, and they did some other cleanups. And at the end of that, there was a discussion of, after we wrapped that up, hey, there might be lean years in the future. We want to engage with you on what it looks like to make sure that we continue to prioritize the educators in this district And what does that mean on supply budgets and these other things? And acknowledging that there are trade-offs, but including the bargaining unit as part of those discussions and as part of the long-term vision and how, yes, everyone might not get what they want this year, but we are in this together and here's where we're going to end up. And that there's a plan not to continually fall further behind. What happens in Topeka really does dictate a lot. My own personal story, I was a teacher, I ran for the legislature because of that. Because there is, what they do there affects what happens at this table and every other one around the state. But what's happened in Topeka recently is increased funding. The funds available for paying educators have gone up. We're not talking about committing you to the exact same raise in future years. We know there are times when that may be frozen or go down, and there are real hard choices to make there. I think the difficulty is that it feels like we're being asked to make those now while funds are going up and other districts are handing out larger raises when they are already starting from a higher point. So all of that to say, again, the budget is your choice. You get to decide what is the priority and what is not, but the financial situations for the teachers are real too. So the same constraints that are in your budgets are on these folks' budgets and everyone else around, and they have the ability to go take a job somewhere else to better address those. I sit at the Elate the New Hire event every year, and there's 150 to 200 teachers new there. There's 120 in this district. There's a job for anyone who wants to find one. There's not one teacher, and that's true of any of the districts around. That's not specific to Eudora, but it is a competitive teaching market, and anyone who is feeling those financial pressures, who's feeling a $1,000 probably average increase on their insurance costs for an individual this year, let alone family plans, there are places they can go to get that addressed. My goal in this, I'm not, the evil union guy trying to run all the teachers out of the district. I want teachers who like being here to be here. And I want that not to be an agonizing decision as they're trying to decide what works for their family and their budgets, especially if we look at what does that look like year over year over year and their futures. So I just asked the district this year, we're not asking for a DeSoto salary. We're not asking even to not fall behind. We're asking to dig the hole slightly slower. I think long-term, there could be really great conversations about how do we turn that trend and how do we prioritize the budget. But for this one, the ask is don't make that gap spread any faster than it needs to, because every year you're going to find new folks who reach their breaking point. But yes, they love being here. Yes, they love the community. Yes, they love all the great things. And one of my favorite parts of my job is I get to see some of those things. And you guys are in agreement this year on a new great thing, which is that parental leave policy. And I think that will be a real star for your district. But all of those things, everyone's going to have their own breaking point where it's not enough anymore because their budget doesn't work, or they're not keeping up with cost of living, or just because it's a great deal to take a job that pays $6,000 more a year. So we just ask you to consider that part of your fiscal responsibility is employing staff that does the work. The product of this district is the interaction between students and teachers, and prioritizing the folks doing that work is part of the responsibility.
Let me push back on one thing you said, though. You made a very compassionate argument, and I appreciate that. You talked about the COLA being passed up. $90,000, that's the difference you all. That would have made all the difference. Well, what if the district had done that and gotten that $90,000 to fund one-time money to fund the continuing obligation? Where would that put you next year?
I'm not my understanding that money disappears. You can't increase it again next
Well,
year, but you can capture it and roll it forward.
But it's still 1 year.
Right.
It's still years. It'll only take 1 year increase.
And then next year, you're back to, okay, we can't raise COLA.
Sure, but I guess the answer would be, let's say that helped you raise $500 on the base this year, more, right? Split the difference between the two offers. It is not a solution for, hey, we can do an extra $500 every year, but it means that next year teachers are starting $500 more, and that is what allows you to sustain what you did the year before. It's not going to exponentially ramp up those raises, but it's also not one-time money. It's not that you get that $200,000 and next year that comes off the books. It's just the $200,000 increase isn't there again.
So this is just, it's a mix of things that you all need to talk about. And you're frustrated that they didn't take a one-time thing that could help this year, but with a longer term perspective, could have been helpful for the longer term.
And I think, again, the challenge is the gap is growing. And if you can eliminate 1 year's worth of that growing, that's worthwhile. That has dividends down the road that you're not $500 further away 4 years from now.
But you all, I think, would agree that with the fund balances that they're operating with, it's kind of a risky proposition for the district. Is it not?
I think they are responsible for the budget that produces those fund balances.
They are.
And they get to make their priorities within that budget. And they have, what it appears they're telling us is, we have not made you this level of priority. And so they locked themselves into
We
that.
certainly wouldn't say it that way, of course, but.
Yeah, you wouldn't. And so what they're saying is, what you're saying, what you just said is the ultimate insult. They could just say, there's no increases for anything for you guys this year. We're gonna increase our fund balances so that we can be operationally more sound. They're not doing it.
I
And
appreciate
I
it.
hope you don't think that they are.
No, that's right. I think there's a reason you all not doing that, because you do value having the workforce that you do. I think our difference is we're asking you to up the weighting that you're putting on that value a little bit. It's not that it's not there. I think, we would be miles apart if we thought that was the case.
You're not dramatically apart from what I see. Do you all have anything else?
I don't think so.
All right, so let me just say a few things. I've not done a school district fact finding in a number of years, actually. I've done a lot of other things, higher ed and cities and whatever. And I just assumed that all of you school folks were getting along together and could agree every year, and there were no more fact findings for schools. I appreciate it. You've done this very well. I was skeptical of your approach, quite frankly. I did one recently for the city, and there were so many caucuses, I didn't think we were ever going to get finished. We do things with judges where when we go to the hearing, we're prepared. There are no breaks. You just keep going. You don't go caucus and figure out your questions and then come back. But I do appreciate the way you've done it. You've presented it pretty succinctly, and I think you've presented it for me as well as you can, as well as it should have been. My goal here, as I put in the agreement, was that we're beyond 21 days from my appointment. That was before I ever got started, basically. So I assume that the 10 days for me to create a report is not a problem for yourself. I don't want to run you out of time for anything or whatever if you need something. But I have enough information that I can make some recommendations. In all the years that I've done this, they're usually presented very much in the same way, and I appreciate the fact that you have not so much that way this time. It's always, I'll get a binder about this thick of all the different comparisons to districts, and we're way lower than everybody else. And then you guys will present, we can't afford to pay it, and some other stuff that says their comparisons are wrong. You haven't done that, and I appreciate the fact that you really are pretty much in agreement on the facts of this case, just like you said. And so I don't think there's anything that I'm going to be able to tell you that will be new. I will make recommendations based on what the facts are, and I think I'm somewhat limited in well, I'm not somewhat limited by the facts, I'm limited by the facts, but I'm somewhat limited with what I can even recommend for you based on the facts that you can present. So, I will do what I can, I'll get it out to you, within 10 days. And I just ask that you all keep the relationships that you obviously have. And keep moving forward. So is there any questions you have of me regarding the process at this point?
I don't think we have any,
Okay.
some final reports, just emailed out to everyone.
Yeah, I will submit it to the same people I've been talking to, if that's okay. Um,
I just want to make sure that Kurt was on that email list, because I don't think he is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just reply all if that's the way you want. And
Yeah.
go. Otherwise,
Yeah, that's fine.
the number is just. There's time gone.
We'd like to add 121 people.
There you
go.
It doesn't matter to me as long as somebody emails it to me, because I'm not gonna type it.
But you have to use BCC because we can't reply.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Very gracious in letting me do this. And I hope that I can come up with something that will be at least somewhat
Sort that through all the papers.
13 minutes early.
Wow, all right. What are the chances?
Hey, they batteries died.